Just clicked on it. So let's see if we're going to do live here, everybody. Hi, everybody. Oh, there we
No, I
go.
don't think
Oh,
so.
okay. I think we're live.
No, I can't.
All right. I think we're good.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't see us on the link, but
You might
unless
have to
you do.
refresh it. Hey guys, if you see us live, give us a little note on the. On
Oh
the
yeah,
thing.
we are.
Oh yeah, I
Here we
see.
go.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey everybody.
Oh, now I know where we are. Okay.
So, hi everybody. I'm Jason. This is Alison,
I'm Alison.
and that's Leo.
Hello.
So the title of this talk is Parametric Insurance, which is about this much about what we're going to talk about. As often, these things kind of spiral off, and basically we end up opening a can of worms. So
There we go. Many worms.
Wah, wah.
many
Can of
worms.
worms will turn into cans of fish
Cans of, yeah, exactly.
that have all the
They're-
radioisotopes.
They're not GMO worms, I hope, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, thanks everyone for joining us. And as we move through this presentation / talk, if you do have questions for us, feel free to post them in the chat. And then I always ask that you put the word question before the question, because when I'm scanning through the chat, it helps me to pick them out quite easily. And also, by the way, I'll be commenting as Alison McDowell because I'm kind of running the chat. But if you see anything,
We're shared identity space.
blame me. Well, you know, they don't. YouTube doesn't let me comment on Alison's videos, so figure that out. Their algorithms.
I can just delegate my psyche to you, Jason, during live streams. That's fine.
And
I trust you.
Thank you. I'm still getting over a little bit of a cough, so I might be like jumping off here. Anyhow, I might switch this around here too, because I'm going to put me on the bottom because I might pop out periodically to hack up a lung. Anyway, so just I'm still actually putting this thing together as we're doing this. I got a little bit more work to do on this end of it. So why don't, Alison, do you want to kind of start us off here, or would it be better for
Actually,
Leo?
it was your request, Jason, I think. But since you're coughing, I'll say. I mean, so we have this new discourse discussion group, and I think the three of us and a number of others are pretty active in the space. And so at some point, Leo, like there was a really long thread about, was it, I don't know, declimate or something like that? I can't remember what Jason had posted. And that thread got really long. And Jason's like, yeah, like you had posted stuff about parametric insurance. We said, we should do something on that. And so we did. So this is the thing.
And that title is for when it was just about parametric insurance, but now it's about 17 other things. So they're related, of course, but so still
They all build off of each other.
Exactly.
Boo. That's the new setup.
Well, and can you say a little bit, because I know you have some new material out on the radio-ecology. I mean, that was a lot of the stuff that I incorporated around like risk profiling, climatic conditions and catastrophes and that sort of thing comes out of the radio-ecology work that you did. So maybe you could just say a tiny bit about like where your headspace has been the last couple of months.
So I guess like the sort of rabbit hole I had fallen into maybe 2 months ago was looking at the origin of a lot of these international biological data standards for classifying biodiversity and ecosystem services, which is like I guess that's where it all comes from. So ecosystem services is this concept that has been kind of gaining ground in like the environmental space and green finance world, and is the idea that the benefits that nature provides us, or river, like clean water, rivers, air, like all the stuff that we just live and like need to exist, that it all has like a quantifiable value to the economy. So like that, say the river does $500 million worth of water purification or whatever. Just that's how the framework they're looking at it. So I was trying to look into the history of how that came about through the UN and whatnot. And that led me to the International Biological Program, the IPB, which was in the mid-60s, and in part done with UNESCO. But the centers for the International Biological Program, one of the main ones was Oak Ridge, as in like Oak Ridge National Laboratories, which was it was a big part of the Manhattan Project and like the early plutonium refinement and the pilot reactors, so making like the smaller scale nuclear reactors to like sort of test their models and stuff. And part of what Oak Ridge was doing was a byproduct of the nuclear reactors are radioisotopes, so elements that they're radioactive elements that can be traced easily in biology, in the earth and whatnot. So what kind of happened after the war is that a lot of focus was put on these radioisotopes because it allowed like researchers to study the movement of say like food in your body and your metabolism and all this stuff, and through the ecosystems. And then through that, Oak Ridge became kind of one of the main centers of ecological research in the United States, and the Atomic Energy Commission was the largest funder of ecology, like from about the 50s to the 60s. And that's where
I think
a lot
that would
of
shock a lot of people. Don't you think?
it's just crazy.
If you came and you told like sort of the liberal progressive green people to say like the origins of this conceptualization of like current corporate environmentalism came directly out of the Manhattan Project. I don't think most people know that. That's super important.
Totally, which really shocked me. And I knew nothing, like, next to nothing about the Manhattan Project besides like sort of the basic stuff that everybody knows. And around that time you had written a couple blog posts about Rochester, and there's sort of this Rochester Manhattan axis, and where a lot of the like forced medical experimentation and other sorts of stuff was going on, which is a part of the radioisotopes paradigm. And there's a lot more radiation.
Interject was that in Rochester, Kodak Eastman was a major employer. It was a center of optics and sort of like optical, like both film and lenses. Bausch and Lomb was there. Later, Xerox was there. And so Kodak Eastman, during the First World War, the chemicals they needed to create their film, their celluloid, which is cellulose, and processing the film, they couldn't get it. So they decided to acquire large stretches of forest and timber in eastern Tennessee. And so that cellulose product was how they came to have a really large footprint in that where Oak Ridge ended up being. But then additionally, because these cellulose products were highly combustible, like chemically incredible, they called it gun cotton because it was literally explosive. And so Kodak, in addition to film, like ended up doing like ordnance stuff too, like explosives, because their product was both imprinting, visually imprinting, and also explosive. So when Oak Ridge started to do some of the exposure around workforce exposure to radiation, they had ties to Rochester, and the medical center there was funded by, I think it was one of the first ones done as after the, I'm blanking on the brothers, the Carnegie Corporation, the Flexner Report, like the Flexner Report, like remaking of medicine for the modern age. The Rochester Medical Center was like one of the first funded medical institutions. So they ended up doing a lot of covert work with the Defense Department. So that was like the Rochester, Tennessee link. But interestingly, through the forests, which is part of some of the stuff you had talked about, because I feel like, when I'm doing my research, you get these little twinges, like this is important. Like I can't quite put a pin on it on exactly why, but it feels like the networked communication of natural biodynamic systems, especially like complex established forest systems are really central to understanding this new like planned distributed mechanized consciousness thing that's going to be the blockchain like network. So anyway, not to get you off track, but that was the connection. You might not think like, I don't really think much about Rochester. I never like, mid-sized upstate New York town, right? And you wouldn't realize how it was connected, but it is in a very direct way, and it matters.
Yeah, and you wouldn't
because now
realize
Rochester's the center for photonics, and the photonics is light. And I know you've studied a lot about like both like light in like cosmic rays and other light systems, and photosynthesis was one of the things they were really interested in unlocking with the radioisotopes, was like how the photosynthetic process works, which is intimately integrated with alternative energy now and quote unquote greening that's coming. So
right, and like all the ecological models that they're building are based on sensors and satellites generally, and that's all photonics. That's all different types of using light, and not just optical, but microwave, infrared, UV, all that stuff to have as much data as possible about the ecosystems. And that's, which we'll talk about, the parametric insurance is feeding both the kind of the new financial markets, like the green finance of the world, and the a lot of this like transition to ESG and whatnot is all tied up in this. And so I guess we should probably just go and
start.
Yeah.
We can talk forever.
So, and I just finished, so as we go along, I just finished where we can add at the bottom of the screen here. I've tried to grab through some descriptions here. So I'm adding a little more magic to our show here. But yeah, these are some of the topics that we wanted,
Well, I mean, essentially what I'm realizing is because, so I will say, like Drew Hempel, who had done a lot of this work on Oliver Reiser, like I have my Reiser, like I have my little library here, the Reiser stuff on cosmic humanism and radio eugenics, like super brilliant, and has these ideas about like the physics and like non-commutativity and like really important concepts that I know are right, and I want to understand better because it has these implications for how we think about the universe and our place in it and like navigating this. But I don't, because I didn't have a lot of background, I struggle with having a scaffold to decode like or understand. I don't have the framework to make. I'll get there. I'm gonna keep working on it. But I realize that probably the way I experience trying to figure out about like sort of abstract physics and meditation and wave forms and things is how other people imagine it for me. Like when I talk, they're like, I think she's onto something, but I don't really know anything. Like I get about 20% of what you're saying, and then the rest of it, like, I don't know. Because we're not used to thinking in a certain framework. Like you have to be, I guess if you were a good teacher, you scaffold people. Like you feed them a little bit, and then they get an understanding, and then you layer on the next and the next. So just as my like journey with this has been from like data applied to people, to data applied to financial systems, to data applied to blockchain, to data applied to machine learning, like it keeps getting more complex. And I think this next layer that we need for people to gradually acclimate to and come along with us is the radiation, like this idea of thermodynamics and economies, like bioeconomies, and thinking about it in new ways. So I put some concepts up there, and I don't know exactly how we're gonna go like touch on all of them, but this isn't, for me, it wasn't just about, like, it was insurance as modeling the way of examining complexity theory and this like attempts on like these crazy peoples like Bernal or whatever to catalyze, I'm terrible at this, new forms of life, like new forms of beingness that they can control through their engineering. So I don't know. We don't want to walk through all of these right now, do we? Or do you want me to just give broad strokes?
So. I think.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll hit on some of these. For me, like the idea of modeling, which you have spoken to about getting the data for the simulations to create the fictions, right? These financial fictions to run the world. Like the stochastics is really central, and finding out that like the core part of in France, the work that you had done, Leo, early on was funded by Rockefeller, that they were funding modern mathematics, knowing that this was going to be feeding into these simulations and derivatives and complexity theory programs. And so for me, like that sort of builds off of a lot of the work around the parametrics. So
yeah, it's all.
We can keep going.
Okay.
I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
And also,
I mean, do you?
Also, I'm not sure if there is like, because you're referring to like the work that I've done. I'm not sure if there's much that's like the video with Seb's is. I'm not sure if that's like public or whatnot. I'm not sure if there's
okay.
stuff that people that would have
accessible.
like be able to see. Yeah, see exactly.
Well, you could probably share your slide deck, right? Like in one of the comments, like we could put a link if you're willing to like make it public for that talk too. And then people could, look through that material.
Yeah, and that has all the sources and stuff too. So
yeah. And so for me, like as we were talking, like you and Jason actually set it up, and then I always like elbow my way in. I'm like, hey, I think this would be interesting, because like having a good case study is always like compelling. And you already had some case studies, but like in the complexity theory, I think the coral reef as like an emergent complex ecosystem is really interesting. And the fact that this coral reef policy was triggered, I thought that this might be an interesting like use case to explore, particularly because it also has some others that I wasn't aware of till I started digging in a little bit more last night. So do you want to say a little bit about like the concept? Like for me, I can chime in on the pay for success side, which is like they'll assign the ecosystem services value to the reef. But there's also an economic value assigned because the location that they have this in, Quintana Roo, which is on the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, and it's where Cancun and Cozumel and these very, fancy resorts are, there's also an economic cost if these reefs are damaged, because then people they won't come to vacation if they can't go and scuba dive in the reefs or in that sort of thing.
I think it would be
so that's
important to make clear that the ecosystem services value is financial. It is economic, like in the by definition of how they do it, and it takes into account like tourism and all the like human, or like what we would call human parts as well. So that it's all sort of wrapped up into one. And I hadn't actually looked at this specific one, but like the basic idea with parametric insurance, which is kind of like a fancy sounding thing, is that when they'll make an insurance contract, and the entire basis of the insurance contract is some trigger event. So for insuring, where these have gotten really popular are called catastrophe bonds. So governments would create bonds that would be paid out in the event that like a hurricane or volcano or earthquake happened, and the trigger event would be some identifiable metric. So in the case of an earthquake, if it hits like 7.2 on the Richter scale, then the insurance payment is paid out automatically. And like that's the whole basis. And that's what parametric refers to, is just the metrics used to pay out the insurance. And instead of like having an insurer come and assess the damages done to property and then payouts based on that, it's like it's all predetermined and automated, which is why it's become like a big target of the Web3 world in blockchain smart contracts, because you can automate it, you can have it run on smart contracts, you can gather capital through the blockchain and all this sort of stuff. And we'll get more into that.
Yeah. And I will say at the very end, assuming we get all the way to the end, that last paragraph where it talks about that they were using modern portfolio theory, like in looking at a conservation of coral reefs, which was essentially like a risk management. All of this is like risk calculations. And so they were applying this idea of like risk to say, okay, these are our top bets for the most important coral reefs in the globe, or something like that. But they were using a University of Chicago-based theory that dates to the 1960s. Like literally it's the Chicago boys, not just running Chile, but they're going to run your coral reefs. They're going to run like every single bit of like life on planet Earth. So I think that that's a really important note to make is that they're continually updating these complex financial instruments, mathematical instruments, and then applying ones that used historically to new use cases and expanding that.
And of course, like right when we start, my cough kicks in.
No, I'm sorry.
Murphy's Law.
Did you have anything, Jason, you wanted to say?
Well, yeah, and I was kind of reading through some of the articles that Leo had written, and kind of talking about like bonding curves, how this relates to like alpha bonds and bonding curves, and then, well, I don't know if you got into this, but like predictive, the predictive side of this, but the relationship to digital twinning and surveillance. So like a lot of this just means like, of course they need more data in order to make these policies work. So we probably have slides to get into that, but those were just the initial notes I made about parametric.
Yeah, and I can quickly say like the whole thing is a digital twin. It's like fundamentally based on predictions, because in order to like design and price these insurance contracts, they need like strong models that they believe tell them certain probabilities of certain events, of certain weather events, which is that's all digital twinning. That's all mass computer simulations with machine learning and all that sort of stuff. There's like no way to just have this concept not, like it just wouldn't work without like mass simulation.
Yeah, and then the other thing go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just saying, like, when I first started looking at the Sustainable Development Goals maybe 3 years ago and looking at Microsoft and the planetary computer, like before I'd actually stumbled into the digital twin, so much of this is information warfare, is how you tell the story, right? And so the story that's being told is that, like, we need a simulation to be able to run the planet. Otherwise, we're all going to die. Everybody's going to die. The whole planet's going to die. Like, the narrative has been set that the fiction that they can actually manage all of these things, and that's a story that they can actually manage it, but two, that it's for our own good. And that's what's so central, is like we need the technology for our own good. Like we have to submit to the surveillance, otherwise the catastrophe will happen. And that's been very clearly laid out at least 1970s in sort of the small planet spaceship, limited resources. And again, I'm not to say that like I want to do bad things to the planet or be, but we're at the culminating point of the story that says we're overpopulated, we're scarce, we're all going to die, we're on this moment. And, there are other ways of looking at it that I think don't necessarily preclude that and require us to submit to Web3. And even if we did submit, there's no guarantee that they actually can accomplish what they say they're going to accomplish. So
the other thing that's interesting about like learning about this is just how, in order to kind of see what's going on, you can't just like study this thing, because it's like it's all part of like a system. The parametric insurance plays in with the what's going to be cryptocurrency, not cryptocurrency, but community currency. Of course, their definition of community currency is different than mine. But just how like you can't understand what it is by just looking at like one thing. Like if I were to study parametric insurance, I wouldn't really understand what it is if I looked at it by itself, And so that's one thing.
They'll just say it's convenient, right? Look,
right.
Like you don't like look at Hurricane Katrina. It takes 8 months for an adjuster to come out and look at your devastated house. If we just had smart contracts, the drone would just fly over and say, "Yep, the house is gone," and pay out whatever like the payout is. And so it's sort of problem reaction solution. Like I'm sure the insurance companies, knowing this was coming down the lane, have created sort of a dysfunctional claim system so that people will be clamoring for it at some point. Like, and this is not exactly a house insurance policy. This is something different, but it is going to be applicable ultimately to a lot of different insurance applications.
Yeah, and that narrative they really push a lot with agricultural insurance and like smallholder farmers. Their arguments like, these small farmers have been cut out of the insurance markets, and they're very vulnerable to risks and drought. and all this stuff because it's just too costly to insure operations at that small of a scale. And then the payouts, even if they do get insurance, take months or years. So now we can do these parametric insurance contracts where they get paid out in a week or two based purely on whether rain has fallen, to if there's a certain amount of rainfall or lack of. There's over $1 trillion worth of I forget the exact numbers, but like a very large percentage of the world's food is produced by farmers on like less than 5 acres. It's like 30%
Wow.
or something, and around $1 trillion. So they've been really trying to tap into that market, and we'll get into some of those. Those specifics.
Well, and I would say too, on the top of that, to access those would be through digital payment portals, right? Like, blockchain enabled. So all of those people, if you don't have a smart, you're going to need to get that, right? And then it enables like the expansion of whatever telecommunications infrastructure into the most remote areas, which it legitimizes that, right? Because they're like, well, in order for them to access these services, you need this, that, and the other. And I think increasingly with some of the edge computing and alternative telecom, there even places that seem very remote for like telecommunications access are not going to be that remote, like within the next 10 to 15 years. Like they have plans for certain technologies that are going to make them connected much more fast, much more quickly. Or even if they're not connected in their home, like somewhere in the village is going to be a place that they can go and like connect up. Like it may not be like directly. So that digital infrastructure has to be installed. And all of these services, whether it's UBI or whether it's insurance or whether it's online education, are forcing that.
Yeah. And from what I've seen too, they don't need smartphones. The systems they've come up with, okay. You can use flip phones and you can text. It's through a system called USSD, and specifically with Safricom is the telecommunications provider. But you basically like text a certain code, and then you can access like your bank account essentially, and it'll like send you back your account balances and stuff. And so these insurance contracts that the farmers are being sold, it's all, they just like text a code and it's being sent to them, and it's connected with the blockchain. So it's kind of crazy.
I read the one of the terms in one of the articles, and I don't remember which article it was, but they called it participatory surveillance. That's where you're getting people to give you feedback, but the term they coined was participatory surveillance. And I was thinking about how like this whole new system is actually in many ways like it's a way of governing people by other means, like outside of the traditional criminal statutory legal system. You're creating a governance system where you're coercively pushing people or nudging people into different directions, getting their compliance based on punishment and reward. Anyways, it's interesting to think about this in terms of governance, digital governance.
Cybernetics.
That's right.
Kubernetes. Now, I had to go back and find this image because this is something I used in one of my very first blog posts, like at least the first year I was doing blogging. But it struck me. I was like, wow, this is an important visual. So this is from a report from 2014. Actually, I think, it's a Rockefeller Foundation report. It's called Innovations in Social Finance from 2014. So, we're 8 years out, and it's sort of like where the investment capital is going to come from at that time, for me, it was social impact. Now it's ESG, right? Like they hadn't really rolled out the ESG in a great detail at the time. And so a lot of the money that I was following was that like little narrow yellow section, which were like foundations and development finance and rich people. But they were creating the market conditions that would enable everybody to come behind. So they created the test cases, the use cases, the research, the think tanks, all of the infrastructure that would allow it to scale. But the biggest chunks, the largest is pension funds, but then the second largest is insurance company premiums, like I guess all kinds of insurance. And I'm not super familiar with all of the insurance space, but that number sort of shocked me, 39%. of like the investment capital is in insurance companies. That's a really significant number. And this is Rockefeller saying this, right? So they're targeting like, how are we going to get the ESG stuff? You know, all of our 401ks, that's the and the pension funds are there, and then these insurance companies. So they have a huge stake in needing places to put their money, right? And I've often talked about, you know, the Big Short, you know, the you know, asset-backed securities, the synthetic debt products that were created with the mortgage and the real estate. But now essentially we're creating synthetic debt with all forms of life, like every living thing in the ecosystem and all the relationships. So insurance is important. I will just chime in from the education side. A huge player in that was the MacArthur Foundation. And back in the 40s and 50s, the MacArthur Foundation, it was insurance. And they were like one of the wealthiest insurance companies around. And many of the hedge funds that are doing the betting are in Connecticut, and Connecticut is also a center for the insurance industry, like in New Jersey, Prudential, Hartford. And again, like that's not even to point out Swiss Reinsurance and then the big global ones. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts, but for me, looking back, I'm like, clearly the insurance companies have a very clear interest in making sure that these parametric insurance markets are set up because they want them automated, because the AI is going to be running these deals. They need automation and scalability.
What came to mind?
No, you go ahead. I'll go after.
Okay. What came to mind for me for like what you're talking about on why the insurance companies are so central is they're one of the main, I guess, like institutional bodies that assess like risk in society, like risk of that's what they're all about, is data and calculating the probability and the cost of events, which is very similar to the idea that social impact finance is kind of based off of, which is the cost offsets for fixing a person or having an intervention at a certain point, because of their data says that if you do that, then down the line, they'll save you this much money. And that's like basically the same like calculus that the insurance companies are always doing. And when they do that, they can also, there's all sorts of securitization and bundling of insurance contracts. And that includes like the catastrophe bonds and all the parametric insurance. And that's where reinsurance comes into. It's the specifics are kind of hard, but it's essentially other insurance companies or other financial bodies that take on some of the capital risk that the insurance company takes on originally with the contract. So it's kind of just ballooning of securitization and stuff, and like all the debt.
I don't even really know how reinsurance works.
It's
like, I mean, I didn't even really know it till I saw Swiss Re. Like, what is that? You know, unless you live in that world, you have no idea like how much power they have. And again, with risk, like what you're talking about is nudging and automation and smart, like cyber physical systems that are constantly evaluating risk and assessing it and readjusting, and potentially using, you know, economic incentives or physical interventions in the way people live to get the outcomes they're looking for. It's kind of creepy.
And that's why people have a hard time, or it's like kind of hard to see how like insurance companies are tied to the military and all that sort of stuff, but it's the same. It's not a different, it's a very similar perspective or thought process, like being hyper focused on that risk assessment and having like all these calculations on the value of things and how likely events are going to occur. It's the same sort of thing as military simulations and wargaming and whatnot. So it's,
yeah. Well, and the one thing I wanted to say, which I'd be remiss to not mention it too, which is when we talk about these funds and this money, we're really talking about monopoly money, and it's a game. And the whole thing is a game. And I mean, it's good to talk about how the game is played, but and I know I need to do more on this as well, but you know, remembering that you know, you're playing this game of Monopoly, but there's those who actually manufacture the board and print up the rules, because I think it's a trap that people always fall into, because we start thinking about money as a natural thing, and all these markets, it's just like the whole thing's fictional. The whole thing is a game. It's not a matter of tweaking it here and there and like, I've got a book back there, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, and I got back in high school because I wanted to understand that, and the whole thing was talking about like, the management of it, like, oh, how much interest rates are we going to, raise? And it's like, no, like this whole thing, they could create as much money or as little as they want, like tomorrow. So, but we always have to keep that in the back of our minds as we talk about like, oh, this is how much money is going to this or that. You know what I mean? That's, I think it's really important to remember that the whole thing is a game, and not, when we start talking about it, to not, you almost like, you have to take it seriously because it affects our lives and such, and the world in such a deep way. But in coming up with solutions, we need to not be attached to the game itself. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah. It sounds like a tangent, but it's not.
I mean, the money and the simulation, right? Because that's, the thing, even with the human capital side of Pay for Success, it's pre-crime. It's you're creating a deficit society because there's a profit in identifying someone as deficient so that you can fix them. There's actually no financial benefit in the way this game is played to have a healthy society, to have a well-adjusted society, to have people have enough, to have nature be in a good place. The game is predicated on the fact that it's trauma-based. It's all trauma-based, and it's predictive trauma, right? So even if you're not traumatized yet, they're going to predict that you're going to be traumatized, and then like do something and say, see, we kept you from being traumatized, even though that whole thing just might be a story that you're living in the simulation. Right.
And the reason why I mention that too is just because, you'll have people that will be like progressive or whatever, like, well, maybe we can come up with a better way of doing this. And my argument is there is no good way of doing this. Like, this whole thing is a construct, and it's not a matter of, rearranging the deck chairs or whatever. Anyway.
Alison, sorry, could you go back for a second? I was a little confused about that graphic. Like what capital are they referring to exactly? Like where investment capital lives? Like, is that like all capital they're talking about? Or, because obviously that wouldn't make sense. There's like banks and other things, but
I guess
I can look at the link and
maybe where's the source link?
I just didn't get the chance.
They're citing the OECD Foundation Center and Deloitte around that. So maybe it's possible that that's simply money that's earmarked for impact investment as opposed to all capital. Maybe that's like the capital that's earmarked for quote unquote social finance. This is sort of where it lives.
Sorry to put you on the spot with that.
No, it's okay. It's a good question. It's the game, and it's the Rockefellers game, so they make a paper. That's how they see things, and then they then they operate on that presumption. Whether or not that's very specific, but I do think the other thing I forgot to mention, because I didn't actually make a slide of this, but I'm just slowly wading into the climate, like weather, green space. But in the human services side, like Kaiser Permanente is a huge player in the insurance, and they're all about the supportive housing and the wraparound housing services. So they're now like very into Pay for Success as their insurance premiums as preventative care and wellness, which of course we'd like for people to have stable housing, and we would like for people to be healthy. But it is going to be embedded within a cyber physical like governance system that is the Web3. And so like, not just like I've seen examples like with MacArthur and the ed tech with Kaiser Permanente and the health wellness tied to housing stability, that these insurance companies have a very clear financial interest in having these products scale. But they tell a really nice story often about like how they care about injustice are fixing things when actually the whole premise runs on continued, like, slightly ameliorated harm, which is what it really is, at least on the human capital side. So I just wanted to start. So for me, it feels like there's like these two different world like lenses, and we're not here like, I mean, I think you guys can probably have a sense of like which one I would like align with, but like two views of the natural world and like how we exist in the natural world. And it's interesting because as much as I keep looking at that foundation for the study of cycles, all of these insurance companies and actuarial companies and risk assessments, like what Dewey says is like, unless you're tapped into the like harmonized cyclical nature, you're going to get it wrong, because you actually can't stop cycles or change cycles. Cycles are cycles. And so it seems like there's a subset of people who understand sort of the expansive nature of the universe as waveforms of very highly complex and harmonized waveforms that are cycles that lead to outcomes in the material world. But there's like a tiny, tiny group of people who know that. And then they let everybody else just run the think tanks and the world banks and the economists to play in that game while they're over there, and they know the sort of secret sauce is sort of what I'm hearing. So I feel like, so I will start with saying Sophia Smallstorm, we had a talk like a number of months ago, and she was telling me about, and if I get this wrong, Sophia, like it's all on me because I'm remembering it incorrectly. But what I took away from it was this idea, because pi is infinite, that when you create a circle as a mathematical model, like it's only an abstract representation, but it can never actually be a firm enclosure in and of itself, because nature isn't closed in that way. And so we can use a circle as a shorthand, but because of the nature of pi is infinite, it's always going to be a shorthand for the real thing, which is something that doesn't have a closed loop. And these folks, all of the insurers, the cyberneticists, they're working from the closed loop principle, as opposed to like an expanding spiral principle. And so like, as we walk through this stuff, I think, and increasingly as the digital panopticon like rolls out, is understanding that the world is much beyond the circle, and that in my way of thinking, that the spiral is much more dynamic and offers more opportunities for different futures, as we do. And that's the nature of, that's nature. I have this stone spiral on the beach, and then there's the placenta and sort of the tree of life. Like, people have understood this for a really long time, and that we don't have a handle on all of the things as much as we might like to think that we control all of them. The control grid that's coming with the insurance and the risk analysis and the interventions, I think is a story engineers like to tell themselves. So,
and I need to do more work on understanding Drew Hempel's research as well, but from what I've read so far, it's very similar stuff to what you were just saying about pi, in that he's sort of saying that there's basically some sort of fraud in early Greek mathematics that turned the circle from a sort of infinitely spiraling up harmonic thing to the closed, the enclosure, and that irrational numbers can't exist, and they're like sort of a false construct, is what you're saying. So it's like a pi is an irrational number.
Well, the other challenge is, you're, even if it's just, they're not just creating an enclosed structure of natural processes. There's an incredible amount, an increasing number of elements within that enclosure that are just totally artificial from start to finish. And so in terms of talking about cycles, like, how does that play into it when they're actually, manufacturing and manipulating the situation? They're not just taking a natural, it's not just like an aquarium or something, or like a terrarium, where they're enclosing something that's natural. It's much more than that,
It's like
I would say Dewey, like,
cycles and be God.
Well, like Dewey's perspective, at least, I mean, and I think there are some people who are at very high level, like trading, like hedge fund trading and systems theorists, who, again, I think it's a very close, like, small group of people who access this, but that you can't stop a cycle. Like, the cycle is the cycle, no matter what it is, whether it's, they measured thousands of things and they collected data for decades and decades, that you can dampen a cycle and you can amp it up, but you can't actually stop it. It's going, like, whatever it is, and they're actually talking about some of it is, like, based on cosmological, like, planetary positioning and things like that. Like, which, if you understand it as like a electromagnetic system, it's really not so far off. Like the some of the metaphysics alchemy stuff starts to blend in with high level theoretical physics and, like, photonics at some point, right? It all starts to be like magic, right? And so I don't know, like, I would like to know for sure. What I can do is sort of see that there seem to be, like, a small number of very connected people who are happy to play a different game and let everyone else play the game they think is the main game, and that plays out. And then behind the scenes, there are people who have, like, additional information relating to the cyclical nature, like, in the open-ended nature of the cosmos.
Well, and so I don't know anything about that. But like for example, the Great Depression, from the research I've done, there's quite a bit of evidence that points to this being a manufactured event. It wasn't just like, oh, its time had come. It was a literal.
Well, I would say you should read the book, because it's actually available as a PDF, because that's what he was hired by Hoover to do, was to study the Depression. And this is what he came up with.
I'd be curious to read it.
I think it's worthwhile.
We do know Alfred Loomis predicted the Great Depression.
Brainwaves and death.
But you can predict things.
What?
I predict I'm going to, you can walk up to someone and say, I'm going to predict I'm going to punch you in the face. And then you punch him in the face. It's like,
exactly.
I know, you're the skeptic, Jason, and that's fine. But I would suggest, like, his book, Dewey's book, is a PDF. And like I said, once you back out and see all the people who are connected to it,
I'll look more into it. But I'm
viral and
go ahead.
And we both
you don't have to. I know you're not going to agree with me today. I think it's
the Joseph Farrell book, right?
Yeah.
And we talked. We both found out about
Dewey's
it.
book itself, is available.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can on Wayback. I'm trying to remember. Like, it's somewhere else in the stack. But you want to go on to the next one. So we've got spiral. We have dynamism, and then we have homeostasis. So the image on the right is from actually a lecture that Ervin Laszlo, who's one of these key systems theorists, it was a speech he gave to the Baha'i in 1989, I think it was. And essentially what he's talking about is an energy flow system for the Earth, like a sort of a solar-based energy flow system, which is actually very similar to some of these energetic currencies that, like, were talked about as early as the 19-teens and 20s and, like, have come back around. And now, this idea of technocracy, it's worth re-looking at in evolutionary economics. But I think some of the ideological aspects that have been layered over onto technocracy, like, it's the socialists or it's this, I'm like, actually, it's a mathematical model that is about a control system and an acclimation system. So for me, this is the contrast. I threw in a look, like the search term cybernetic circle. I was like, what does a cybernetic circle look like? And on the left, that's the cybernetic circle, is sort of this, mechanical systems, or the attempt to engineer these circles. And Laszlo is keeping everything contained, because if they're going to actually run their game, we have to actually believe that they're effective, right? Like, we can't say the emperor has no clothes. So they have to actually come up with a whole structure that makes it seem as though they're actually doing what they say they're doing. And this is in direct contrast, as I see it, to a dynamic, evolutionary, like, complex system. They're trying to, like, put the complex system under a cup, and contain it, and then manage it within sort of a geofence, geoengineered, managed system. So I don't know. Can you guys see the different, like, the two? Is that helpful? Because to me, I think if we can constantly revisit, like, which story is being sold to us and what are the motivations, it's useful.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's based on an assumption, or like a imprinting an assumption that data exists that things can be quantified. It's just, you can't have a control system if there's unknown and things that aren't quantifiable. And I feel like pretty much anybody who has like spiritual or faith practices or is like interrogates the mind, like there's things going on that you can't like sense. So like it's a different, reality is very different. So either they're training us to think in that way. And
really narrow. Well, and I know that you've been doing, like, you've done a lot of looking into like telescopes and because like I think once people get in their head, wherever that is, but can like adjust to the fact that our sensory apparatus is really limited in terms of like all that is going on in the world. Like I keep reiterating that, like people develop tools to expand that, and whether or not how the tools that they develop are actually accurate in representing that which is beyond our ability to know with our five senses. And I think as we develop more and more tools, we're also increasingly, like as we fall into scientism, losing the internal, like the intuitive, like knowing, or the inner knowing, the pineal, that tool. Like many people don't trust that tool, like their intuitive tool, and they're looking for like the better, more emerging technology to expand, because everybody wants to know more, like that we're not satisfied with just where we are. I don't know. It seems like the tools and knowing how much we don't know. Like if you actually had the humility to admit how much humans don't know and how much we've been wrong, the major interventions that they're talking about, like we would never even be considering, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Okay. So this is part of one of my big, my radio-ecology thing. And so Leo, so this is the stochastics part. And I was going through your slide deck and sort of putting together the pieces of the people who are in there and looking at is it the Institut Henri Poincaré in Paris, this Center for Math and Theoretical Physics in 1928, and knowing that the International Board of Education of Rockefeller essentially helped set that up with the idea that this was going to be a center for modern mathematics and physics. Like they knew that they needed this. Like, and I think the justification at the time was like they'd lost so many people in World War I, and they, to get the edge back, like they needed to develop this, innovative academy of instruction, but specifically around mathematical probability. And then there was, Émile Borel, who is the French mathematician, and in probability, because it's all risk, and the Navy, because again, it's frequency and waves, it's these waveforms. And then the Louis de Broglie, the physicist with the wave properties. So this, I guess it goes back to the spiral versus the cybernetic versus the wave and the cycle, is that I feel like these guys knew like that it was about the wave, that it was about like the physics of understanding and predicting. And that wasn't there something where, I can't remember who it was, but they took de Broglie's thesis and Einstein was like, he's lifted the veil, like he's lifted the veil on the theory. Yeah. And for me, that very much at the same time, I had been looking into Hoover, who not only hired Dewey to do the work on the cycles, but it was also very closely linked with Belgium, and later on, like the Belgian Congo and radiation and Stanford, that the Belgians sent him this veiled Isis statue. And so when you talk about like lifting the veil, and even in this veiled Isis statue, it's talking about life itself, like the creation of life itself, that these people, sure, it's about money and it's about control, but I do feel like it's increasingly this sort of Dr. Frankenstein godlike drive to be a creator, which Jason goes back to the whole Mormon transhumanist conference. What will you create? We're all creators. Like in the evolutionary algorithm world, we can all create stuff. And so for me, as the backdrop, and we're going to go into a little bit more on the parametric insurance, but regulating systems of life in cycles, like trying to overcome natural cycles and impose new kinds of cybernetic cycles to force people towards this new evolution, like to force force, if not people, then molecules, the molecules of existing like life into a new form. So
yeah, and it's also
kind
not.
of what
I was going to say it's also not just one thing too, because there's different. There can be different interests that are kind of maybe working towards the same thing with different focuses. It's not like it's one thing. Like even like money, like it's not one thing. It's a whole bunch of different things. That's where people get confused. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the Frankenstein thing.
yeah.
The Broglie there, he comes from a French noble family. The Broglies are like French nobility, and that goes back to the Austrian empires where they were like crown princes. And his brother Maurice, which is to the top left of him, Louis, he was an early like pioneer in X-ray spectroscopy, like using a rotating crystal and having X-rays go through it in order to like ascertain different properties of whatever medium the X-rays were going through, and just some of that early research. And they were both involved in the Navy, or like early Navy wireless communication systems during the World War I, and I don't think they were active in World War II. And he was also involved with, Louis de Broglie wrote the like first public calling for CERN, like first, it was like a paper through UNESCO that like calling for the creation of an international, essentially atomic energy like laboratory, but they kind of reframed it as high energy like particle physics, but it's basically the same thing as nuclear research. And so there's just
so it's sort of like we don't know what matter is. Like, I mean, maybe the physicists, like we experience it, but I think there are people messing around in the waveforms in ways that we can't, the average person can't comprehend. And there's so many things that are unaccountable, right? Like that you're like, well, that doesn't, like in terms of behaviors or things that come up and you're like, well, that's not consistent or logical, but you don't know what the waveforms are doing, like around, like we're energetic, like magnetic things. And so these people, it feels like they've been messing around in the waves for a very long time. And I did include, I didn't circle this up, but the John Butler Burke, who was making his so-called artificial cells with the radium and sort of changing what he called life. And he made this irradiated bone broth that he was like, oh, look, it's alive. And this was during the time when everyone was really interested in the properties, like this transmutational properties of radium. And, I think looking back, like these xenobot things are kind of like, for me, the irradiated bone broth, right? Like new forms of life. We've got new forms of life here, guys. We made it with the evolutionary algorithm. And so I think realizing that some of these discoveries have these long-standing precedents of people who've been trying to reinvent life, since the early 20th century is kind of interesting. So anyway, that's eventually we'll get to how insurance fits into that. Yeah. So these are the xenobots. Yeah. Are they alive? We'll get back to the insurance. So I'm just talking about can you pin down life, right? The cyberneticists think you can pin it down in a geofence circle, like circles upon circles upon circles. And later on, I'll show about how the edge is sort of the emergent space that they imagine their life forms are going to come out of. So, all right, that's mostly, I just wanted to touch living machines. And then this is the Isis statue, which I included like in the discourse thing, but she's holding a lamp, which feels like photonics. And then there's the Ankh in her other hand, and she has the veil. It's a very unusual statue. And it was, Hoover, after World War I, scooped up all these documents and took them to Stanford. And he built this library with this tall tower with the carillon that were the bells from the New York, the World's Fair in Corona Park in Queens. And, and this statue was sent to Stanford, and Stanford was like, couldn't wait to get rid of it. They were like, can we just be done with this? It's a really ugly statue. and it had an inscription at the base that says, I am that which was and is and will ever be, and no mortal has yet lifted the veil which covers me. right? So I am that which was and is and will ever be, and no mortal has yet lifted the veil which covers me. And so that's on this Isis statue. And to me, that seems very clear about the de Broglie like reference, like lifting the veil on what this is. And the Ankh is the sign of creation. You've got the womb, and then you have the phallus, and it's this like dynamic thing. And the fact that UNESCO, when they're working, this was in the 70s on Man and the Biosphere, like intentionally incorporated that Ankh into their logo. And then it's also been part of like Huxley and others saying this is man in the environment. It is embedded in the environment, that like we are embedded in our situation. And I think in that is how they want to engineer sort of these new life forms. So I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
We'll get there on the emergent.
Like with the M diverging from the Ankh, it's like creating a sort of an alternative path.
Yeah, that's true.
Like they're cutting out.
Let's get off on the side path. Like, let's get out of this cybernetic loop.
And it's probably worth mentioning that the Man in the Biosphere program was pretty much developed like in tandem with the National Biological Program. They're very related.
Okay. Well, and Frank Molina was working with UNESCO too. So from Caltech, like there are lots of people. Actually, what's his face? Berggrun's dad was working at UNESCO. Like there's a lot of overlap with these sort of high level scientists and influential figures. And let's see, I brought this in because I think Hutchinson and Bateson, like they were connected, and I didn't realize. So Hutchinson was a mentor to one of the Odom brothers that were like the fathers of the ecological movement in the US. And he was at Yale, Hutchinson, and Bateson had a connection. Hutchinson was part of the Macy conferences, and he and Bateson knew each other. And like, I just included this because there's this, in the 1970s, we started looking at the Earth as a cybernetic system, as a spaceship, as a closed system, as like a material, that everything was material. And so Bateson published Steps to an Ecology of Mind in 1956. And I do think a lot of the radioisotope work that the Atomic Energy Commission was doing, tracking both carbon cycles through ecosystems, but also medical isotopes, like ultimately is going to relate to consciousness and integrating consciousness of like in vivo life in our bodies with the larger ecosystem. Like they're working on this integration, like the hive mind integration of synthesizing life altogether. So the fact that this human potential movement, Bateson was connected in Esalen, I'm pretty sure that the guy, is it McConaughey with Ocean Protocol? Is that his name? Trent McConaughey?
Trent
like
McConaughey.
He essentially, talking about like you could exercise your potential by caring for the environment through tokenization. Like you could help realize your best self by participating in tokenomics in this cybernetic system. And I think in these exchanges of token and risk and connection and making them all visible to the machine, it's part of the insurance. Like it's part of this next phase of the Vernadsky, Teilhard Desjardins, like unity, right? Because ultimately they want us to love the environment. And I don't not love the environment, I do, but not on their terms. Like the biogeochemistry, they want us to become one. And they'll frame it as, the Tao, or, non-dualism or unity or whatever, or ascension. But I believe it's it's a cybernetic, like you're going to ascend into, I don't know, Jason, you had that video, that MTV video of the, whatever, killed the radio star.
Video
like,
killed the
there's
radio
the woman
star.
like dancing in the tube, like the magenta woman dancing in the tube. And I'm like, yeah, well, like we'll think we're part of like Gaia and fulfilling our human potential, and we'll end up dancing in some clear damn tube, Oops, wait a minute, let me out. And that's actually A Wrinkle in Time. Like the dad is trapped in the tube, Don't go in their tube.
It looks so fun.
And everything being based on like binary mathematics, which is how computers and software and transistors work. It's like a pretty obvious giveaway that you're not going into like unity. It's literally the opposite.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And then Okay, and so I keep saying, so the Neil Stephenson books, again, like this guy, like he's knows the stuff. Like his parents were high-level scientists at Fort Meade, Maryland, and he's worked with Magic Leap VR and written these books in the early 90s, coined the term the metaverse. And so I found an essay that was talking about, and maybe I should have thrown this up front, but this idea of life at the edge of chaos. And essentially what he's saying is that emergent behaviors in complexity theory and mathematical theory in these evolutionary algorithms happen at the phase transition between order and disorder. And that there is the exchange, there's the stability that's offered by the edge that provides the structure for the emergence of new potentialities, I guess. And so these people, again, like the MTA folks in Provo, they want to be creators. Like they want to be creating and catalyzing new developments. And I think weirdly, the sort of energetic economies that will be tied in with climate change and disaster and insurance products are ways for them to manage the game, such as to achieve energy at the edges of these cybernetic circles and holons. So I'm just going to read a bit. They're talking like phase transition. It says, it is at the edge of chaos between the highly ordered structures and randomly colliding molecules that we can expect to see living systems emerge from non-life, mainly because this is where processes that can store and transmit information have the best chance to arise and gain a foothold. And so they're literally imagining life arising from information. Like that information itself will coalesce and become some sort of sentient thing with agency. And part of, when I was doing some of my site visits, I went to, I can't remember the name of the school, like Southeastern Virginia University, where Orson Scott Card is. And he had this thought process of phyllotes and entanglement and pattern holding, that the molecules like become complex enough that once they can hold their pattern, they start to coalesce as objects with agency, I guess. And so I think it's important to think about within the risk space, within the insurance space, within the stochastics and probability and statistics, and the idea that they're really working on, they're advancing things called the donut economy, pods, you hear pods a lot, learning pods, house pods, that they're creating these artificial containment zones to generate the edges that they hope will maximize their opportunity to become the creators, these cybernetic systems that they want in this phase transition. And it's all computational though. Like, so the life that comes out of it, I mean, you're right, Leo, it's going to be limited by design because it is coming out of computation, out of information which has been stripped down of everything except for the binary encoding.
Yeah, it's taking all that like essence out of communication and exchange of energy.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So I don't know. Does any of that, like, I don't know if you guys were following what I was trying to like write the past 2 days, but to me, this feels like it's not, yes, they're going to make money on these insurance things. They're going to control people with these things. But ultimately behind, I think that they're using this concept of managed crises, steady states, homeostasis, peace, unity, harmony, because actually that harmony UBI, that's part of it, to lure us into this false sense of security and safety, to essentially give up all of the dynamism of the natural world, like all of the potential, both scary and transcendent of the unknown, and give that up and then just walk into the circle and just stay on the inside of the circle.
Yeah, I mean,
anyway,
I agree. I'm not sure if I have anything that's coming to mind exactly. Oh yeah, that's a good timing.
Yeah. So this is a little so this is the Kavli Institute. I think in Norway, actually, it's one of their outposts in Norway. So the Kavli Institute is working on understanding the mind. And I think this one might have actually been in Norway, but and this is the fiction. Like I was going to sort of say this at the end, but I think this is the story that they want to tell, is that we have very fancy scientists who have all their credentials, and they did the scientific experiment with rats and neural transmitters that could capture all of this brainwave activity. And they put them in 3 different environments. One was like free ranging, one was in a maze, and one was at sleep. And they monitored all of the neural signals and then used some algorithm to crunch the numbers. And across all 3 scenarios, all of the rats always ended up forming a toroidal shape. So what they're saying is that you're like there's no way out of the toroidal shape. And to me, like what this is the rat running through nature, like, but it's within the torus into the simulation, right? Like it's the armature that, oh, you think you're in nature, but really this is just a simulation game. And it's interesting because the rat itself is illuminated. And I think that there's something to this, like the photonic illumination. Although a lot of times when you see images of neuron transmission, they're always like blink, 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 like they have these lights. And you can see in the upper corner, there's the blockchain, right? There's the hexagon. And it's interesting. I'm not sure what this signifies, but the edge, like a little pooch, like thing that comes out of it, like a explosion. But to me, like whenever you see that block, like, you know, that's a blockchain block, that's to, you know, this is part of your mind file simulation program, you know, which, yeah, we're not files. Let's just say that, like, we're not files, people. Like, you know, we're not in that torus, actually. Like, if people imagine that they want you to think that that's all you are, is like something that is a rat running in a torus in a simulation, and that you just upload it to the blockchain and then put it on a hard drive somewhere, like, that's the wrong story. But that's the story that's being implanted. Like, to me, that's conjuring. Like, that's imprinting a future where we're all trapped as like a rat. But they'll maybe let us feel like we're not quite in a maze. They'll let us feel like it's natural, and yet the ultimate result is the same. But that's not true. But that's the story that's being told anyway. So I feel like that's the containment system for the cybernetic world.
Well, what's funny is that they thought that this was like something that would sell what they're doing. I don't. It seems to me like this is something your opposition would create to like warn people. Pretty funny.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they don't expect a whole lot of people to imagine that they're the rat in the maze. And so, like, for me, and Stephers has been doing this work too. So, and I'm going to say a lot of this work, Leo, like, for the stuff that I've been laying out, a lot of it is based on like the time I spent with your slide deck and getting acquainted with like the road that you were walking. And I'm sure I barely scratched the surface, but Jen Lake, which is Polio Forever, and Jen, like, WordPress, like, I owe, like, just in terms of like, if you want to know more, like, there are people, I'm just like baby stepping into the space and trying to apply it to what I know of the finance side. But like the radio elements and sort of the climatic implications of the sort of the Cold War fallout, isotope tracking, you know, the early radiology and crystallography, you know, that I really sort of, you and Jen were the launching points for me on that. And then Stephers has also been doing a lot of work around the torus, and, you know, it's feeding into some of these new tomahawk or tokamak reactors, nuclear, like new kinds of fusion reactors. And so I came across the donut economics, which is all part of the stakeholder capitalism construction, like the circular economy, right? The circle, we're going to have everything be circular. And again, I'm not saying that I want to be wasteful and I want to throw away culture, and that I want to not be a good steward of the earth. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. But I think that the circular economy that they're selling people is inherently part of the nanotechnological panopticon control grid. Like, it's a fake green. It's a fake sustainability. It's not authentic. And they're framing it as a donut, this thought leader, Kate Raworth, who is at like the World Economic Forum. And so, you have the society, and then you have the ecology. And so again, it's man situated in the biosphere, man in the biosphere, people in nature, because they need to control both parts. And if you imagine, if you go along with the story, they tell themselves that at the edge, they have more potential to create new sort of emergent forms of life. If you can herd everyone into the donut, like not just a circle, like a donut is a double circle, a circle in a circle. Like you're not quite doubling the edge, but you got extra space in there. You got more edge. And, as I was placing this and thinking about the order from chaos, which is clearly like Masonic, right? Like that's, that's what they always say, order from chaos. And even what did they say? It's the Ouroboros, like the snake holding its tail, the circle. Mm-hmm. That this is a very ancient imprinted concept. And when I was doing my site visit to MITRE Corporation and Northrop Grumman and Intelsat and MicroStrategies and Capital One, like when I was in that space, like, and I was in front of MITRE, which again is kind of like, it's a highly symbolic, like the hat, right? The MITRE. I was in 3 circles that day. Like the display on that corner, which is a public street, it was set back. Like it had a small little plaza, maybe, 15 by 15, not big. And in the backdrop, it had a vertical, like their corporate logo, but in the sidewalk space were 3 circles. Like, and it was just low, like with it was a cybernetic circle. It looked like the cybernetic circles that we had seen with like a metal band, and they were not quite parallel. They were out of sync. So they like, if it was your washing machine, it would be off kilter. But, someone on the live stream said, I think I would get out of those circles if I were you. But it's an interesting imprint, in that space of like what the edge of the circle does. And then the role of the economics in it, that we are remaking social relationships and ecological relationships as a fictitious financial construct. I don't know.
I've been getting junk mail exclusively from Capital One recently.
Oh no. George Overholzer really wants you to like keep you happy with like some nice
sign up for
debt.
25% variable interest rate credit cards. Oh, good.
I just like the ones that says you're approved to apply.
Yes.
Yes. That's pretty funny.
Chosen.
Wow.
You're the chosen one.
So this, like when I was going back and looking at that first, like the coral reef bond and it being on the Yucatan. So this is we're back to the coral reef, right? Complexity theory and risk and emergent life. Cause I think, again, think about the richness of life in a coral reef. Like, I mean, that's an uneven edge. That's not a nice, tidy circular edge, but they're looking for that, like that emergent richness of like that you would have in a vital, coral reef in a good ecosystem. And so it's in the Yucatan. It was facilitated by the Nature Conservancy, and those all have ties to the World Wildlife Foundation, and Swiss reinsurance is central to this. And it just so happens that, so this was happening in, Quintana Roo. So Quintana Roo is on, as I mentioned, the Cancun Cozumel side. But then opposite that on the peninsula there is the Chicxulub crater. Is that, I don't know if that's how you say it, Chicxulub's crater. Like the giant asteroid meteor that crashed down, and the story goes that that's what eliminated the dinosaurs, like when it crashed. Mm-hmm. And it actually is on the opposite side of that. So it was the crater itself is partially on land and partially in the water, and it's connected in a karst cave-like system. But the impact of that crater, like of that collision, the heat it created a crystalline, like this very special crystalline form in that space with different kinds of water bubbling out around it. And a lot of this stuff was crystals and water, like in unlocking, Steffers is doing more work in terms of like primary water and crystals, because control of water is control of life. Control of surface water is control of life. And that's what they need to keep everyone under control. So I just wanted to situate this geographically, that it's in a significant location, this particular coral reef deal. Okay.
Yeah, that does seem significant. I didn't quite put that together about the location before.
Yeah. And so someone and this is the synchronicity stuff. So yesterday, actually, Eve, who did the great zine, she sent me a slightly updated version of the zine. And she's like, what? And I think she's in Florida. She's like, oh, you probably know that the Miami Smart City Conference is coming up or whatever. You probably know some of the people. And so I was like, okay, well, let me look and see. You know, there's a bazillion of these smart city things all over the place, but it's in Miami. It's in 2 weeks, September 14th and 15th at the Miami Beach Convention Center. And who is going to be there? Well, Mauricio Villadosal, who happens to be the governor of the state of Yucatan, is going to be there. So along with NIST, the Connected Systems Division, and then also the mayor of Denver. So I feel like, again, these systems are interconnected, like in regional, global ways, and they're all networking. Like these guys know what's coming down. Like they know the deal.
So, and Mexico is where
and
they did
Miami
a lot of.
And blockchain. Oh, I was just gonna say, like, is so interconnected with Latin America. Like that's the door, and it's such a blockchain heavy city.
Do you want to
You can go.
Leo, do you want to explain what the catastrophic bond is?
Yeah, so catastrophe bonds.
So yeah, sorry, I said that wrong.
Oh yeah, it's close enough. Parametric insurance products that insure. They're generally done with like states or countries or cities that insure them from like natural disasters. Usually volcanoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, flood. I saw one, those sorts of things. And they were mostly pretty much developed by the World Bank in the early 2000s, like late 90s, and were first being like tested and implemented. There was like a mix of, I think the World Bank like subsidized a lot of the early catastrophe bonds and like had these countries like Caribbean nations and Mexico take up these products. And it's parametric in the sense that, say, a hurricane, you had a catastrophe bond insuring you against hurricane. If the hurricane met a certain threshold of like wind speeds, then the insurance claim would automatically kick in and the country would get a certain amount of money based on the threshold it reached, instead of, like I mentioned earlier, instead of the insurance companies assessing property damage and then basing claims based off of that. So that's the kind of basics. I just found out actually this morning that the first like hurricane catastrophe modeling was created by this woman, Karen Clark, out of Boston. And they ended up making a company called Air Worldwide that was bought by V-Risk based out of Jersey City, which is like this massive, you probably know about them. I had like just learned this morning, like software modeling and all this sort of stuff. They have like 8,000 employees. I'm sure they do all sorts of stuff. And they own another company I thought was really interesting based in Lexington, Massachusetts, where they called atmospheric environmental research that was started in the 70s and doing like working with NOAA, the DOD, a lot of the like early advanced weather satellite monitoring and all that sort of stuff. So it seemed like there was kind of this consolidation around this relationship.
I was just gonna like the photochemistry, like that, like one of those in terms of the atmospheric, it was like photochemistry. So it was like light based, like chemical effects of light, which makes a lot of sense. But I just never even occurred to me that it was actually a thing, and that's what they were using to sort of like model. Yeah, I know, but I guess, I don't know, somehow it felt like when I see photochemistry and you think about, light, I mean, I guess we all know that a light affects us, whether it's natural light or fluorescent light or LED light, but so much of the climate narrative, right, is being framed around light management. right? Managing darkness, managing lightness, managing the kind of lightness. I mean, I'm still trying to puzzle out the degree to which like smart streetlights are a key part of this like optogenetics and influence, like wave-based influence in photonics of living systems, or how it's going to be activated through photonics, because I can't see them putting so much money into all of this light-based infrastructure in smart cities with it just simply being energy efficiency. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. These lights are like kind of brutal. Like when you drive, like, you know, you look at them and it's like, it's really harsh on the eyes. Like, I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but it's like, I really do not like them at all. Cause I just, if you even like look anywhere near them, it's almost like it interrupts your, it actually interrupts your focus. Really. It's wild.
Huh. It's weird.
I would say they started adding all these LED lights in Philly, and it looks like Blade Runner. It looks like bad Blade Runner. Like I look at the skyline and I'm like, because, you know, we're not that far off the skyline, our house, and it just, they've added all of these extra bits of light, like for accent, but it's, none of it makes you feel good. It's jarring. So
I agree.
yeah, I just added this slide with the cat bond about, and it's interesting that it's Mexico because, you know, again, Mexico is geologically very active, right? Like on the faults and the hurricanes. So it's quite a target for these products. And this was, like early 2000s.
Wait,
2006 was the first parametric bond in the Mexican. So I don't know if that was the one this is referring to.
Yeah, I guess this is a report modeling the risk.
Okay.
Alison, did you get this from the paper I posted like earlier today, or did you?
I think so. Yeah, I just grabbed.
Okay, I was like, wow, that's crazy. Like you had to.
No, you posted it. I was kind of thinking, Jason,
cool.
when you're like, could you talk about cat bonds? I'm like, I think I have a slide about that. But but the thing is, like, I think the other piece is that Mexico is essentially a test bed for so much of this. And, you know, I did all of that deep work into the conditional cash transfers. And once you realize, like, those are things that can be manipulated, you can manipulate economic situations. And, like, ultimately, like, we know that at least they say that they have the capacity to manipulate weather systems, you know, and there's been a lot of conjecture about tectonic weapons, right? And so, you know, they're not going to come right out and say if they actually have tectonic weapons, but, you know, if you know how to frack things, I mean, like, how hard is it that you imagine that they have, like, with all the directed energy, that you don't have some way of, like, again, I'm not saying maybe you make it up out of nothing, but if you have an unstable area that you could, like, put your finger on the scale a little bit and, like, weigh it down. I mean, once you start to play games with this amount of money, it's hard to imagine that wouldn't happen. So, so Mexico feels very vulnerable. And, you know, the reality is many of the elite that run the governments, like, they're educated up here, right? They go to Yale, they do these things, and then they get trained here, and then they get sent back to essentially, you know, do what the network tells them to do. At least they did with the conditional transfer.
That's what's crazy about these parametric catastrophe bonds, is just this, you're incentivizing a situation that there actually is the ability to manipulate. You know?
Yeah,
Totally.
Crazy.
And at the bottom there, Air Worldwide Corporation is the one I just mentioned earlier. And from, at least as of June 2022, they apparently are at least listed as a modeler for 70% of all catastrophe bonds out there. And I guess I sort of forgot to mention this earlier, but with these catastrophe bonds and parametric insurance, there's always a third-party verifier that the trigger event was actually met. And that's these companies, these sort of modeling agencies that are doing the machine learning and all that sort of stuff. And the one that I had written about before is Mitiga Solutions, which we'll get to.
One Oracle, you know, they call them oracles or whatever, but like that's what, you know, looking into Chainlink, that's a lot of what they do is finding these trusted third parties to collect and verify the information the data, make sure
exactly.
to claim that it's...
In like a smart contract world, there would be an Oracle system that connects to like Air Worldwide, and they would get the information from them, and then that would trigger the smart contract. And
yeah. Well, and in my defense, by the way, on the slides, Alison was adding slides right up to the very last minute.
No, I didn't mean it in a mean way. I just didn't want to interrupt you and be like, I couldn't remember where it was.
I'm about to talk about that. No worries.
No, it's fine.
Well, with a lot of this information, I think it's good for us to hear it more than one time. I mean, I know I need to hear it more than one time for it to like, oh, okay, that's what that is. I heard that before, but I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. Okay, so this is the other tricky thing. So there's I have a little map on the upper right of like the peninsula. So the red line is the coastal area with the coral reef bond. Okay. And then on the flip side is, I don't know if it's Merida, is the city. That's the circle is like where the asteroid crater that killed the dinosaurs is. Like, so that's a very significant energetic space, right? Like if you're going to pick a energetic geography, like on the globe, like that would be it. And in fact, like the cathedral, the San Ildefonsus Cathedral of Merida, I think is the first Catholic cathedral in the New World. So they knew it. And I think it's built on Mayan ruins actually. So there's a lot of energetics going on in that area. Like, and again, it's not exactly in the coral reef, but it's in that proximity. And being in consideration of all of the work like that Jason and I are gradually building up about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and their investments and their technology interests, there's a temple, a relatively new, I think it was like 1990s. Mexico has the second largest population of members of that church after the US. And then it's like US, Mexico, Brazil. And there's a lot of tourism that's specifically spiritual tourism in that part of the world because they're the Book of Mormon talks about things happening and they believe that that's the region. So when people take sort of spiritual tourism trips, a lot of them, like there's a smaller group of people who imagine that those things happened in Ohio, and then it's more popular that people think it happened in Central America and the Mayan ruins. And so if you were planning a vacation to go do spiritual tourism, like would you want to go to Dayton or would you want to go to Cancun? Like they go to Cancun, right? And so there's a huge, like it's not exclusive, like clearly like there's many tourists, but it's a destination. And like the Marriott family is a very prominent LDS family, and their brand, like they have 30 brands. There's like 30 different hotel interests, like along that coral reef. So it's very interesting to me because the church is actually very deeply into the insurance markets and into, I think, even catastrophe bonds. And so they would have a very direct actual connection to the economic outcomes of those coral reefs in that particular locale. Like it's a very interesting overlay of interest. And the other thing that I had found out was that it says that, so the newly formed state, so this state of Quintana Roo is not that old. It says it's 1974. So again, there's not a long history there. And that Cancun was the first master planned resort. And so whenever I see sort of master planning, like that's the human resource aspect that I imagine. Like, again, they're not planning a cooperative or a kibbutz or something. They're master planning a resort, but maybe it's more along the lines of, Jason, what you've looked in for Epcot. But like there's considerable interest in developing in very specific ways that geography. And it overlaps with the interest of the LDS Church, which I find compelling. So I don't know. Did you find that interesting? Like I was just finding that last night.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I don't know so much about LDS, but that kind of reminded me, one of the founders of Cello, whose name I can't pronounce, his dad was, or grandfather or great-grandfather, somewhere in there, was one of the main planners for Singapore, like UN commissioned.
Oh, wow.
Like, like planners for building the city-state. And that just reminded me of that when you mentioned King.
That would be.
It's you funny mentioned.
Well, again, I was just going to say, we went to that conference in March because it was about blockchain, literally. And this is, I guess, what I'm trying to link is it was blockchain across the board in all sorts of ways, from relationships to religion to salt nuclear reactors to, whatever, Haber-Georgianism or whatever. It was all of these different ways of integrating blockchain, which to me feels like the Frankenstein stuff. It feels like the creator stuff. And once you realize that the Human Genome Project came out of the Salt Lake City area, once you realize that very high level technology is there, that the first virtual object was developed at University of Utah, once you know the role of BYU in digital identity and the NSA, I mean, it feels, anyway, it feels significant to me, not just coincidental that they both would have financial interests, but symbolic interests, and that by creating a more financial instruments that would advance further blockchaining of the environment, continue to advance this, human plus program.
It's funny, yeah. Their conference, and if you can go to their YouTube channel, it's Mormon Transhumanist Association. Their YouTube, and you can actually watch all the talks that they gave, and yeah, it was on a lot of different topics that might not seem necessarily connected, at least directly. And I know I sent one of your articles to someone recently, Alison, and they were like, "Oh, I hope she comes up with a hypothesis or whatever that connects all these disparate things," and it does. If you read through it, it does appear like these are a whole bunch of things that are disconnected. But you have to, if you spend some time with it, you realize that there is a through line. It's just not always immediately apparent.
Taming the spiral. Their attempt to tame the spiral. It's not going to work, I don't think. So here you go, Leo. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't mean to hog up all this stuff.
No, you're good. So this is a diagram I got from we should get the links are in the description, I think, but comparing parametric insurance to traditional insurance. And I've mentioned a couple times, the trigger event, So in traditional insurance, the insurers are assessing the loss or damage to property values or to the thing that's being insured. With parametric solutions, there's none of that. You don't assess the loss. There's just a predetermined amount that will be paid out from a predetermined trigger event. And they sometimes tier it, so there'll be different thresholds. Say if the one that I wrote my article about was a volcano catastrophe bond, and the trigger event was the height of the ash plume from an eruption, but it was tiered. So if the height plume got to a certain height, a certain amount would be paid out, and then more and more if the plume was bigger. So they kind of do it like that.
Why are they bringing a bunch of blowers up on the mountain?
Well, see, the thing is, what if you write the contract? What if the contract is for the plume? Only what happens is that the earth opens up at the bottom, and then the lava just flows all out over the village, and there's no ash. And they're like, "Oh, sorry, man."
Sorry. Exactly.
Yeah, I guess they could have fans from above blowing down. There's lots of ways to do that.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunity for manipulation, and and I guess part of what those people would probably respond to that, or we can't respond to a lot of the criticism, but generally parametric insurance has been kind of framed as supplementary for the most part to larger financial planning for states and countries and stuff. It's not sold as this is how you're going to protect yourself against all things. It's sort of a smaller niche thing, but it is growing quite a bit. And I guess this part, basis risk, I'd have a hard time exactly articulating what they mean by basis risk, but essentially the risk of loss for the insurer of whatever it is, whether it's property or whatnot. And in traditional insurance, that's all kind of in the fine print on like what they're exposing themselves to and how they do it and how much value is at stake and whatnot. With Parametric, it's kind of because it's all about the data and all about the modeling and the likelihood that the data that's going to be fed in will reach that three predetermined threshold. So it's like it's kind of an insurance. If you're creating an insurance policy for the metaverse, like that's what it would be based off of data. So.
Wow. Well, yeah, and then it allows the permanent surveillance of everything and
exactly
feeding that. Like, again, you know, I keep thinking about the environmentalist movement, right? Like, there are real costs, energetic costs to store this data, to collect it, whatever. I mean, they're coming up with new ways of like trying to, you know, alternative ways of powering the stuff and storing the data. But like, imagine you have sensor networks that are just constantly waiting and recording to see if some trigger event happens for years on end. Like, where does all that, like, exactly. I don't know how it works. Like, do they erase it at the end of the month, like when the thing didn't happen, or does it just build up? Because I think it's this vast data store that they're developing for the pattern recognition. Like, that's what they're seeking.
It's all machine learning.
They want to know the cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's constantly, the data is constantly refining the models, and it's all cloud based, like with the Microsoft Planetary Computer. That's
Azure.
Azure is their broad cloud solution, but they're building like a planetary computer thing, which is basically a planetary digital twin and other sorts of software products for doing environmental monitoring and this sort of thing.
Have you come across anything in this space that's kind of similar to like shorting?
Yeah, so with all of these contracts, they get securitized, and that's part of the reinsurance process, is bundling them into different securities, and then they're traded on like securities exchanges. And there's different ways how that happens. The Catastrophe bond with the Danish Red Cross, they wrote about, the firm that was securitizing it is called Replexus, and they're based in Guernsey. I don't know how to say it. It's an island between Britain and France that is
Guernsey.
Kind of like Guernsey is a basis for where a lot of insurance companies are incorporated in. And they had a blockchain. They basically created like a proprietary blockchain, like a closed blockchain system for the trading of the securitized catastrophe bonds. So yeah, you can short it. You can do all the various types of trades and derivatives. And I'm not super well versed in how like.
So this was an image. I grabbed this image off the Guernsey website. I don't know if you guys can see that, but this was on the I went to their website, the Guernsey. So ILS, that's on his cape. The ILS, that stands for Insurance Linked Securities, which is collateralized insurance.
What?
But they're like these superheroes, and there's like these like.
I didn't know this where it came from. And the magenta and like.
That's really crazy.
What is that?
Yeah, I found this morning. I was like, oh, I got to grab that.
You totally have to grab that.
Where was it? Like on the website of the like government there? Or?
Is it the insurance? Like.
Well, the GIIA. I think it's the Guernsey's
website. They have like a conference coming up, actually. And this was like it was on the top of the advertisement for their conference.
Look, there's like a sailboat in the tornado.
Let me see if I can find.
But interesting, like look, like the spiral, but it's a spiral of destruction. Like the spiral is being framed as a solely destructive force, which is interesting. It's like run away from the spirals and get in our nice circle.
Yeah, and they have the volcano in the back. That's definitely a reference to the catastrophe bond. It was the first volcano Catastrophe.
I'll have to find that link because I deleted it. But it was off of something that I think something you posted. It was I followed a link that kind of like, or maybe I just searched it something. I'll find it again and send you the, because Guernsey's the island. There's an island. But it's also like but they have a conference coming up, so we should go.
Wow. And it's interesting because like it does feel like water is a key piece. I mean, I know Steffers has been pulling together stuff about managed water and like wastewater, ocean water, fresh water, drought, pumping, like the control of the water wars is going to be a really significant part of, and I'm sure they'll have all sorts of catastrophe bonds related to drought as well.
Yeah, I just read one about, it was a Swiss Re insurance product about river heights. So about if the river, for like transportation, so if the river goes down to a certain level, then that would be the payout because it would disrupt like commercial vessels and stuff. And they called it flow.
So I found the website. Let me just throw it up here. This is the website. So they have a conference. This is actually a different image. I didn't see this one. Thursday. Oh, that's an older conference. But they have another one coming up.
Wow.
Anyway.
It looks really destructive. It all looks really
Looks
like we don't want to build a world that runs on disaster. Like, can we just all agree that shouldn't be a hard conclusion to draw, right?
Yeah. Let's
just not do this.
So yeah, it wouldn't let me click on stuff because I have it as an overlay. But anyways, it's weareguernsey.com is the website. We Are Guernsey, and it's GUER.
We're on fire. We have tornadoes.
You
want to bet?
Laser modified eyes.
Oh.
And I think the last thing I would say from this slide is that parametric insurance, because of the kind of clear trigger metrics and the like data heavy emphasis, is like kind of built for automation and smart contracts and that sort of thing, which we'll get into right now. So this is just like a simple diagram about how oracles work. So basically oracles are just a layer interface between like traditional web servers, really any sort of data source that is considered to be like that. They predefine what sources are considered like valid. And then having that information be used by smart contracts on the blockchain, because the blockchain can't just like say like read the prices on the New York Stock Exchange or something. Like there needs to be some sort of software intermediary to make that work, to have the smart contracts read it, and that's what oracles are at a basic level. And they're kind of their own, in some ways. They run on a lot of the same game theory that blockchain does. So in Chainlink, in a lot of Chainlink systems, the oracles have to stake like the token, the Chainlink token, and then get paid certain amounts based on their performance, and that they, push the data from the servers that they said that they will. In a lot of cases, those oracles sign like actual legal, like service level agreements with like the DAO involved or some other like foundation or party involved in the smart contract system. So it's not just a lot of these oracles are basically just like regular business relationships in a lot of ways. It's not as like esoteric as it might seem. And it says web servers there, but a lot of that could be like IoT devices. really any sort of internet connected device, or straight from the satellites or from the organizations that model all the data from the satellites and whatnot.
Can I ask a question, Leo? And I'm not sure
Yeah.
if you know how this works, but like ultimately as augmented reality becomes more robust, like there's more sensors, there's more engagements, it seems to me that they're probably going to come up with sensor networks that are like low power requirement, or maybe just are activated in proximity when there's like like it senses there's some other device nearby that it needs to engage with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like that it would just rest. Like it would probably be at a low energy state at some point until it has to like pop up and like do something, because they don't want to power all this stuff. That really is this edge distributed, like low power, but that
Totally.
people would need to have an interface with the Web3. And that's either through a wearable, or eventually maybe that's an implantable aspect. Like, so that when you walk up to the sensor, it can identify you and know how to transact. Yeah. And so I'm just wondering, do you think like the oracles would be embedded in a wearable, or would it be up in the cloud somewhere? Like,
so the wearables it would probably happen in like a number of different ways, but basically the wearables would be in the place of the web server block on these slides. So the oracle, the wearables would be sending data to the oracles, and then the oracles would be triggering the smart contracts. But there'd probably be like intermediaries in there, like probably the data from the wearable would be aggregated into some other like, you know, data service, because it's probably some sort of like pretty complicated thing going on, and then that would be communicated to the Oracle network. But yeah.
I found this little clip that might help. Maybe I'll run it real quick, and hopefully I have it queued up in the right spot. I'm kind of eyeballing it, so forgive me if it's not, but this is from Chainlink, actually.
That's when we get to oracles. An oracle is a trusted third party that gives you reliable data outside the current information that you have access to. See, back in medieval times, an oracle was a person who could use their crystal ball to see into the future, essentially giving reliable information to someone who wanted it. Whether you believe in that stuff or not, when it comes to blockchains, they want the same thing. See, a blockchain cannot see outside of its own code. It can't go searching around the internet, and it can't even ask for more information. It's simply coded to store data and transactions, like I mentioned in the beginning. However, we can write smart contracts in a way that they rely on third-party information like the price of a stock, the temperature outside, or even who won the presidential election. The oracle can act as a middleman between the blockchain and the real world. Also, one thing I want to clarify here, oracles aren't real things. They're usually just code programmed by someone and trusted by a lot of people. So there is no real physical oracle out there. It's kind of like the internet. We can all use it and we kind of know what it is, but it's not really one thing. For the rest of this...
All right. Anyways, a little...
Yeah, I think that was definitely helpful and probably clearer than what I said. I think at what they said at the end, though, I don't think is really true. They're not like... They're computers. They're like a node run by someone. Like someone has to run the software. So that might be... A lot of it's probably done in a cloud environment, but it's still like being maintained by someone, and especially with the weather related ones. It's usually like a weather station out somewhere.
Right, and they pay them. They'll pay them in like tokens in order to like reward them, and that's isn't that kind of like the stake of like they get to stake.
Yeah, they have to stake. Usually they have to stake some amount of the token, and then if they don't meet certain like performance like requirements, which is basically if they don't like keep putting in the data that they say they're going to, then they'll lose some of their stake. So it's a financial incentive to make them behave a certain way, which is the basis of how blockchains work. Anyways, especially in proof of stake. And then they also get rewarded if they do it right. And for a lot of them, like with D-Climate, we were talking about earlier, the DAOs that control the smart contracts will choose what oracles they want to use for their smart contracts. So they'll kind of define a predetermined set of oracles that have the authority to trigger those smart contracts. And that's managed through the DAO. But yeah, so this diagram right here, where I was talking about earlier that you don't actually need smartphones for a lot of these for people to use. And that's this program USSD, which I forget what it stands for exactly, but primarily through Safricom, which is a telecommunications provider that, if I remember correctly, is owned by a larger French, or used to be owned by a larger like multinational French telecommunications company. But the farmers can just, okay, I'll back up for a second. For a lot of how the insurance products that are being sold to small scale farmers, they're actually like wrapped into the buying of seeds and like fertilizer and that sort of thing, and is a part of the supplier will just like bundle the insurance into that, and oftentimes it's free. So they make it basically as like trying to make it as easy as possible. And I don't think they really sell like these insurance products by themselves generally.
Interesting.
And then, yeah, when they're bundled up, they're, I don't know exactly how it works, but essentially they get certain codes that they can text on the USSD system that tells them the status of their insurance agreement. And then when the certain metrics are hit, like rainfall, if there's not enough rain, they can check and then see if the payout occurred. And so, yeah, as this diagram is showing, the data is put into the blockchain, and then that money bag on the bottom, this part is one of the big reasons that these insurance tech companies are really interested in smart contracts, is that it's a lot easier for them to pool capital, like pool risk is the other way they would put it, to supply these insurance products. They can just get it from the blockchain. There's a lot of capital out there and it's constantly growing. And they can then they can integrate all the various financial smart contracts and applications that already exist out there into these insurance products. So just, trying to make as much money as possible. And basically the data triggers whether the pool of capital is paid out to the farmer. And I feel like this diagram actually isn't as good as I would hope, but I mean, it's basically describing the same stuff that we've talked about a few times now, and how parametric insurance works, and that the data that triggers the payout gets fed into smart contracts, and smart contracts are the tool that will automatically send the money to the farmer. And then, since like they're on a flip phone, it's intermediated by the telecommunications company, essentially, is how that works. From how I understand USSD, it's the telecommunications company runs a server that's connected to the internet, and basically just is the intermediary there.
Can I chime in? One of the things,
course.
I just wanted to say, like on the fertilizer stuff, because we talked about that a bit later about, they have this sort of the new synthetic biology fertilizer that's like activated at the roots, or I don't know if it's technically remotely activated by certain conditions. Like the next phase is going to be sort of nanotechnology based, framed as bio and organic. They're gonna tell a story that all of these synthetic things, because they're made out of molecules, some kind of molecule, that this is like so much better than chemicals. And I can see like in the narrative that the way they talk about nitrogen fertilizer, which I'm not saying is great, but like they're costing it out so you can imagine a transition. Like they're gonna phase the transition from nitrogen into these more targeted synthetic biology fertilizers. So when you were talking about like how it's packaged in with the seed, and I can imagine some of these fertilizers come with their own nanoparticulate like sensor networks. Like it's interesting to think about how the pullback off of the old nitrogen-based fertilizers, which, you know, prior to that was guano, prior to that was like more small scale, you know, you couldn't have industrial scale agriculture, that you had to have smaller plots that were like actually self-sustaining. You know, how that might end up feeding into the parametrics or the sensor networks, because like, how are they going to know about the rain, right? Like, unless they come up with like, because I don't know. Here
for right now, it's just
it rains everywhere. But like in New Mexico, it could rain a whole lot one place and one block over, the rain isn't there. So they're going to need a really granular level to run these deals, I think. And I can see it being woven into the seed. Like, here's your seed and here's our new fertilizer, and we're doing pay for success finance with the nitrogen offset, and we packaged your bit of insurance in it too. You know,
definitely.
It's so tricky.
Yeah, right now, as far as I understand, they basically are just using like local weather stations is how they do it. It's not super granular, but with a lot of the insurance companies, and I think in Google and the large scale GIS mapping firms, they can get, you know, they have pretty high resolution for a lot of these things, like less, like a kilometer or less, and like, you know, so I think a lot of it will really be satellite based and remote sensing.
Oh, that's true. Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Real quick, before you go on to this next one, I have to step away for just a minute. I will be right back. Carry on, and I'll see you in a minute. Sorry.
Okay.
Let's all
let's just take a break. Actually.
Everyone, we're just gonna all take a break. We'll be back shortly.
5 minutes. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. You know what I can do? I can give you guys. I'll just leave you with this. We'll be back. I'll leave you guys with this lovely image. Okay. All right. I bet you guys are sick of that image. We're back.
So I snuck a little slide in between, Leo. I just thought this was like trying to convey like the how the machine reads the space, like in the smart contract. Like it's something that it's important for people to start wrapping their heads around, because just like our sensory apparatus is limited by like has limitations of what we are able to perceive, the way the machine like perceives is also different. Like it's a different level of perception that involves coding and artificial vision. So like as all of these smart contracts proceed, like the idea of the artificial vision and the machine seeing trees, seeing people, seeing stuff as part of this semantic web. And the web is all of this like metadata, layers of metadata. And I can imagine that while the sensor networks are building this simulation, like they're like the granularity and the big data analytics of built like living environments will get more and more refined. Like I don't know how much within an augmented reality layer you'll see. Like when you walk up to a tree and you have on your whatever augmented visual things, like will you know the health of that tree or be able to pull up pictures like every 5 years of that, you know, like how much of the recording system of this artificial vision and monitoring is going to be embedded, and just even rethinking of it, like the world that way. I don't think people are equipped to even imagine that that's the kind of layers that are being built and what it might look like. I don't know. Do you guys think that's worthwhile? Like the cyber physical part of it, like the semantic web, like how we think about the world is changing.
Definitely. I
Absolutely.
mean, yeah, I'm not sure. It's hard to know how it's going to play out exactly.
Yeah. But if we're going to justify it in terms of disaster management, right? We've already been conditioned for the past 10 years. We're living in a potential disaster area. Every day you wake up, the end of the world could come. Like some terrible thing is going to happen. Like that's the news cycle. And so that preconditions you to feel like, well, we have to live in the panopticon. Otherwise there's no safety. And I guess what I'm trying to say is like, we have a different lens. Actually, those stories, like we don't necessarily have to live in their bad stories. I'm not saying to be dismissive of like actual concerns about the environment or poverty or things, but like I don't know that we want to live in the story that they're trying to tell, like and capture us in, because it's that rat story.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say one thing that for sure will be embedded and is already happening is the like trees' role in the larger like web of ecosystem services and like quantified monetary value that it's a part of. So, and those like accounting standards have recently been set by the UN's like statistical divisions on how they're going to do like their international standards for this ecological like biodiversity accounting, and how it'll come down to each tree and how each tree sequesters this much carbon and respires this much air and all that sort of thing. And I feel like that will likely be embedded. I'm not sure how like if you'll be able, like with your like smart glasses or whatever, like see it, but that will definitely be
your iPad or
a part
whatever.
of it. Yeah, it'll definitely be a part of the tree's identification on some level, whether it's just seen in a forest or if they get down to every tree, which they probably could pretty quickly. At least
I mean, the thing that I found so devastating in the last piece that I wrote was like looking at this Green New Deal Atlas. I mean, and these people are so fraudulent, right? They're experts, and yet literally like the equations that they're creating, the stories they're telling are that like by 2060, 90% of the United States is supposed to be covered in forest. And I'm assuming they mean forest, like not a scrub, like, so what they're talking about is ecocide, right? Like that's actually ecocide of any sort of non-forest system. And to me, like then there's a huge conversation to happen to say like, who is it, whose power to remake the environment in this way in the name of like averting disaster or, you know, the carbon sequestration. It would be catastrophic because there's great beauty in desert landscapes, in prairie landscapes, in Arctic land. Like, I don't even know, like there's no water to grow trees on 90%. Like how would that even happen unless they tap into their primary water stuff and then they make it public? But like, there's so many inconsistencies in the climate narrative, and I keep hoping that eventually, you know, people who truly do care about the environment and making things right will start to recognize that this mechanical, like, semantic web version of financial derivatives in nature is just such a terrible idea.
Well, and the thing I think about with like even the parametric insurance is just, this is all about protecting and expanding financial interests, you know, and so it's anyway. Go ahead.
Sorry. It's just a bit. I feel like that's something I haven't quite, because it really ties into like the monetary stuff that you talk about a lot. Is that by creating these ecosystem services and biodiversity values that can be insured through parametric insurance, is it's creating money out of nothing. Like before, they didn't have like a financial value for a tree besides the ones that was actually commodified, but just now they're creating a financial system where they're creating money and creating debt instruments and securities and derivatives on top of all this stuff. It's like complete, just like alchemy money made up stuff, which is a huge part of the
and
whole
I keep thinking, and I might be a bit like, I'm not sure if I'm right, but it feels like this would be the logic of it, is that the chemotaxonomy, or the chemotaxonomy, like the idea of taking the taxonomy down to a molecular level, and the idea that like the new profit, like the actual, is connected to molecular design, right? Synthetic biology. And that you go prospecting by sampling, right? And these samples could be very small. Like there was a woman that I talked to who said like someone in her family who really cared about the environment, but they were trying to deal with like the fungus on the bats or whatever. And so they took a blood draw of all these bats. And like that's value in a molecular engineering standpoint. Like all of a sudden now they have a database of like tens of thousands of bats communities, like that that's prospecting. And they don't actually have to kill the bat to get the data to feed into the simulation, but you can create this fictitious constructs. Like you could bioprospect a whole ecosystem through chemotaxonomy and put all the molecular potentiality into a simulation and leave, except for maybe slightly disrupted, the stuff, and then call it a day and say you've made all of these resources for this new, you know, fraudulent like system of construction, like fabrication.
In like the pharmaceutical industry, they've been doing that for a long time with plants, jungle, and all that, the bioprospecting and creating synthetic versions of it, and patent, all that.
Yeah. Well, I see how people, fall for it though, because there's a logic to it. You know, we have to save the economy. Like none of us, I had someone the other day say, if it weren't for the system, basically you wouldn't be able to eat. You wouldn't have a roof over your head. So there's that logic of like, if I don't have money, I can't survive. But it's hard for people to step outside of that, to say, well, maybe there's a different arrangement. It's not like we're going to get there overnight, but maybe we, we're in a trap and we need to like step back and think about that and how do we overcome that. But it's just like, oh, it's a given. We gotta protect, we gotta save the economy. We gotta stop the next 2008 crash or whatever. Aside from the fact that they're not actually trying to do that. I mean, that's a separate issue, but even if they were, it's problematic.
Yeah, it's like Cello, and it's a big part of like the sustainable Web3 narratives. It's like they're making money beautiful. It's like, oh, we have to we're incorporating the natural world into the monetary system, and that's the heart of the pathology of imperialism and colonial mindset. So
finally,
it doesn't take into account nature.
Trees finally have a seat at the table, at the board, at the boardroom table. We're going to finally let trees have a seat.
Yeah, literally. Except they'll be.
And I was just like, I thought that this was connected to that as well, like the semantic web. It describes it as a path through a labyrinth of data. And so this is another like imprinting that Steffers has been looking at. Like, and I even like came into the labyrinth idea early on around the idea of the Minotaur and Wall Street and sort of Mithraic, like this engagement, at least with Pay for Success, that we were engaging with Wall Street, like in the labyrinth. But like the computers have to have structured information. Like literally we are remaking the world to make it machine readable so that the machine can rule us. Like that, and we're doing it in the name of safety and stability and the idea of automated reasoning. So the machines don't know anything. Like everything that the machine can do, we actually have to teach it. Like, I mean, eventually it's going to start to build itself, but like at the baseline, all of the data that we're feeding in, all of the patterns, all of the coding, we are literally building our own labyrinth. And like, I don't know that we're going to be able to get out of it once we built it. Like we're herding everyone into that middle part, but I'm not sure there'll be a stream when the time is ready for us to get out. So, yeah. And again, this is something I had talked about before, like right before I left Twitter, and I need to revisit it, but it's this like deontic logic. And so I'll just read this. It is a field of philosophical logic concerned with obligation, permission, and related concepts. Alternately, denotic logic is a formal system that attempts to capture the essential logic of the concepts. It can be used to inform imperative logic or direct modality in natural languages. So it's this like, you could do this, you must do this, you can't do this. So there are these series of like decision trees of like in combinations of like you, and I can see this is part of both the semantic web and the cyber physical system and the smart contracting and the risk profiling is now we have our obligations or rights or opportunities are mediated through the web, through the smart contracting. So I wanted to include that because I think that's an important concept that we should start to interrogate is like actually get on the same page with the people who are coding these things and understand that it is a structure of philosophical logic. And then do we actually agree? Like, do we want to live in a world where everything is a mother may I token? Because most people don't have their heads around that yet.
Yeah, when I saw that, that's what smart contracts are. It's the codification of obligations, requirements, and how like the windfalls of what you can do and how you can do it and what your choices are. So I saw that.
It's interesting that it's 2018, but it was in Malta, and Malta was MIT's test bed for a lot of stuff, like the early blockchain identity and education was in Malta. No surprise because they always pick these little like states of exceptions, but yeah.
Cool. So this was a smart contract based weather insurance product for smallholder farmers run by Mercy Corps, and specifically their AgriFin division. And I'll show on the other slide, just like so Mercy Corps they're a big, they call themselves a humanitarian aid organization, but they're funded by USAID. They have a long history. They were in, I'm forgetting the country, but they've been involved in a lot of state activities around nations other countries being messed with, and they're part of that sort of apparatus. And they're tied in with a lot of the Christian organizations as well. Yeah. And one of the founders was from Israel, or if he wasn't from Israel, he lived on a kibbutz for some time. And the other one, Ellsworth Culver, was very religious as well. And it came out after he had died, did really horrible stuff to his daughter and a lot of rape and other intense sexual abuse of other kids and stuff. And that sort of has come out recently. And they do a lot of blockchain piloting in general. The articles I've written about Cello talks about this more of Mercy Corps, but they're working with all sorts of different blockchains. And they have a large their agrifin sector is about both agricultural finance, innovation, quote unquote, and digital technology and that sort of stuff. So this was a pilot about testing the kind of what we were describing earlier, the smart contract based weather insurance. And the diagram I had earlier was actually from this article, I believe, but the slides got kind of mixed up. And
I'm sorry.
it's science. And we'll talk about Acre Africa.
Mercy has been around for a while, though, right? Like, is it, they said the 80s or something?
80s or 70s. Around there.
Yeah. And so I think that's like the article on Silicon Icarus about the Nigerian Civil War and like the way in which development aid and the humanitarian systems and like, what is it, Barbara Ward Jackson, like that was the necessary prerequisite for what's coming, right? Like they were building the smart contracts, whatever, Scott Stornetta, the Mormon, whatever, like they were building that stuff like they had to build it up, but they knew that they needed to pave the ground for the religious, the faith-based interventions, the NGOs to get the global reach, the global networks. And now like, it feels like the blockchain smart contract system can just be injected into those existing networks.
Exactly. And they're funded by the agrifin sector, by MasterCard Foundation and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well. So it's like, it's loosening up these places for the larger financial interests and all that.
And I just inserted this one in just about the derivatives on the insurance and weather. I think Steffers had pulled this woman up, but she's French mathematical professor Hylette Gaiman, and she's also affiliated with Johns Hopkins. But her focus was securities markets and commodities and risk management. And she's been doing it for 20 years with banks, energy mining, commodity trading. And so the insurance derivatives and the weather derivatives, that's really central. And if you imagine, I think there's another underneath that says an electricity derivative. So thinking back to the Enron, right? I can't remember, there was the movie. What was the name of the movie, Jason? Do you remember? The Enron?
Smartest Guys in the Room.
Smartest Guys in the Room. And there's this scene where essentially they're gambling on the energy and they have control over the grid, and that there's some cost incentive to move it out of California and send it somewhere else and then bring it back in later. That was causing all sorts of rolling blackouts. And so they literally, and this is a long time ago, they're contorting the people's access to electricity, not because they don't have it, but because the way they can move it through the network will enable them to have a financial advantage. So you can imagine the setup with these derivatives products with other things, it's decentralized kind of, but not really. The people who are in control, I feel like they can start to use these networks in ways that really, with the cyber physical systems, many different aspects that will impact life, well beyond what Enron was doing the stuff. So I just wanted to, if we had concerns about how the derivatives, we have already talked about it, but I just wanted to make sure there was, insurance derivative placeholders there.
Well, what's wild is all the people in this space that came from Enron or their offspring, right, that are involved in building a lot of this are actually they come from that actual company.
John Arnold. Yeah. And I just put this in also just in gaming the system, like the weather company, IBM. I don't think we actually peel back a lot of us and understand where does the weather data come from? Who's manipulating it? How who knows how hackable data is? You could go in and be no, I'm just shaving a half an inch off that rain level or adding a little bit more or tipping it. And, I don't think that there should be that much power concentrated in these companies. And it was saying that they're working on forecasting 25 billion forecasts a day with actionable weather data. Well, we know what actionable is. It's going to be feeding into all of this. So just wanted to hit on that.
Well, I know there was a quote by Mark Twain that everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. So maybe they're now they're going to do something about it.
I know, exactly. And I don't know, I might have a couple other things I might have slipped in. Let me see. Yeah. So again, there's like always these questions about the weather and like, you know, they claim they can, right? I mean, this is the office of the historian of the Foreign Relations Office of 1964 to 68 in Laos. From the memorandum from the Deputy Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Kohler, to Secretary of State Rusk. In our view, the experiments were undeniably successful. This is cloud seeding, indicating that at least under weather and terrain conditions such as those involved, the US government has realized a capability of significant weather modification. If anything, the tests were too successful. Neither the volume of induced rainfall nor the extent of area affected can be precisely predicted. The only absolute control, therefore, is after the fact, in other words, to halt cloud seeding missions. And essentially, they were saying they accomplished their strategic goals in Vietnam through creating enough rain to saturate and clog up the transportation routes, like for heavy vehicles. And you know, again, this is the 60s. You know, and this is a public document. This is not conspiracy theory document. This is part of that. So, anyway, just and just to hit on more of that. So this is like Jen has done a lot of work on Langmuir and Steinmetz. So this is at Rutgers, which is interesting because, you know, my neck of the woods. So it's Einstein at the RCA Center in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Langmuir was really central in the weather manipulation program at GE. And then Steinmetz was working in, you know, various levels of electrifying the grid and the Technocracy and Columbia University and energy currencies, like literally like economics based on energy. So if you go to the next slide, I have just a little map. This one, so it's a little blurry, but essentially it's looking at Thomas Edison, who was a theosophist, right? You know, who founded General Electric. I went up to his lab in northern New Jersey. Underneath is Langmuir, who is a chemist in plasma physics and weather engineering. And among his projects was working on cloud seeding. So Project Cirrus, Storm Fury on weather modification. And then Steinmetz was also with the GE. He founded the GE Research Lab, but went on to be part of the Technology Alliance, Technocracy Incorporated, the Energy Survey of North America, which is 1919, the idea of an energy credit currency. And then this was connected through Columbia, Howard Scott, who kind of led that for a time. And he was affiliated with M. King Hubbert, who was a petroleum engineer at Columbia. And essentially, Hubbert established the peak oil theory in the 1956. And so I think, like, again, I'm trying to sort of pull us back on the parametrics and the energetics, like back into also understanding the sensor networks and ecological currencies, economic currencies, and how these interactions happen. And they go back, again, to the early 20th century with Edison, with Langmuir, with Steinmetz, and the underpinnings of the technocracy movement, but not because it was the socialists after us, is that ultimately the goal has been always to try to trigger the hive mind consciousness through some sort of an energetic, economic, free market exchange system that's tracked through distributed networking systems.
Yeah. Back to Agrifin. I basically kind of said it earlier, but they're just saying who they're funded by.
MasterCard, programmable money.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the partners in the project we showed earlier was Acre Africa. And so Acre Africa comes out of a project called Kilmo Salama, which was ran by the Syngenta Foundation. And Syngenta is a very, very large, there was Swiss-based chemical company that was bought by a Chinese state-owned enterprise. I forget the name of it. I think it was mining related. But they're a massive, fertilizer, industrial, chemical company. And through their foundation, they created essentially an offshoot of that Kilmo Salma project, putting the foundations for this parametric-based insurance products through Acre Africa, and they've gotten to millions of farmers at this point. And the woman who ran Kilmo Salma Rose Groslinga founded this other insurance tech company called Pula, which we'll go into the next slide, but is a part of one of the first smart contract consortium insurance products ran by the Lemonade Foundation.
Yeah.
What's that?
Can you go forward, Jason? I think it's, yeah, there she is.
Yeah, there she is.
Yeah.
And so she was in charge of that project. She started Pula, and Pula, one of their funders in 2018 was the Omidyar Network.
Oh, wow.
And they're
You want to go to the next one?
tied
The
into a
next.
few things.
Yeah.
And so this is the Lemonade Crypto Coalition, the LCCC, as they call it, just basically a DAO that will be governing the smart contracts that are pooling capital for parametric insurance offerings to smallholder farmers. And these are the organizations involved with it. Lemonade, the Lemonade company, is there, and like kind of, I don't know, they're probably like 5 or 10 years old insurance tech company that has a lot of ties to Israel, which I don't have the specifics.
It's such a cheerful little like font. Like it looks like something like for a preschool or something. Like it's an unusual choice of font. Yeah.
And they sued T-Mobile for the magenta because T-Mobile had patented several shades of magenta, and they have like a whole thing about how their scientists like came up with these shades of magenta, and Lemonade sued them over that because that's their color is normally magenta. It's not that black, but so it's a weird connection. Is T-Mobile is invested in Cello and is pretty involved in Web3 in general. Avalanche is it's a blockchain platform that came out of a university. I was looking at it the other day, but I forget which university, but they're kind of just one of these other competing smart contract platforms, blockchain, built on the Ethereum virtual machine, which pretty much every blockchain is compatible with Ethereum in that way. And they are the blockchain going to be used in this coalition. And they recently signed a partnership with Deloitte for building basically a accounting and verification platform for FEMA for like disaster contracting. So a smart contract based platform to basically handle the contractor relationships and the various like due diligence and accounting that is involved in all of that. So they're working with Deloitte on that. Chainlink, we talked about earlier, is the Oracle system. So the interface between the weather data, however that's collected, and the blockchain. So making all that weather data executable by the smart contracts to trigger all the insurance products. I was just going to go through the other.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Go ahead.
You're good. And Pula is the company that Rose started, who was a part of the Syngenta Foundation, and they're another insurance tech company specifically focused on smallholder farmers. They've gotten 1 million of people through mostly parametric insurance offerings, but not exclusively. And yeah, they're really doing it. And they're also one of the co-founders. His name is Thomas, and I can't pronounce his last name, but he worked for Deloitte for 6 years and was the lead actuary for UAP Insurance, which was like the partner with Syngenta for the Kielmo Salma project. Ether Risk is they call it a decentralized smart contract based platform for insurance products. So they've been kind of trying to do that for really, they're kind of since at least 2015. And I don't actually know what Tomorrow.io is. I haven't looked into them, but Hanover Re is the big insurance company that's facilitating all of this. And DAO Stack is a they're basically an organization that focuses on building DAOs and the various mechanisms of coordination and creating DAOs eventually, and voting and control of smart contracts. Because people probably don't quite realize, but all smart contracts have to be controlled by someone or something, and that something is generally a DAO. Or sometimes it's just controlled by a person. But yeah, exactly.
Here's Deloitte's website. I was just looked it up.
Magenta shirt there.
I like that. I'll have to read this article, A Whole New World, the Metaverse and What It Could Mean for You.
Oh, great.
What is that circle? It looks like a petri dish. Is it like?
It does look. Oh,
Yes,
no,
that's
it's a
metaverse.
person. Oh, it does. Oh, that's
Yeah, I can't tell.
Oh, they're holding up something. Oh, maybe they're doing
like a
something
sun.
magical. Oh, little solar stuff. Okay. Stay out of the
Inside the
circle,
circle.
people. Stay out of the
Right.
circle.
Yeah, I think that the sides. I might have done this, or things got mixed up.
I
But
might
this
have
was
messed
just
up. I'm
from
sorry.
the original Lemonade report, just describing the partnership and the coalition and what they're doing. And a lot of this is really just about automating insurance contracts and automating all the financial arrangements and derivatives and secondary trading and all sorts of crazy stuff they can do with blockchain and
Well,
building
it's
that
interesting because I see it says Tomorrow IO generates actionable weather insights using a proprietary data and models soon to be augmented by dozens of radar-equipped satellites.
Yeah,
So
I think
I
there
sort
are
of feel like the
weather.
radar piece is important. Like the frequency stuff that's bouncing around. Like I feel like all of this stuff is also dual use. Yeah, sure, maybe it's getting actionable weather data, but those frequency things that they're working on is like transforming the ether, like transforming the environment that we're inhabiting into something else.
Yeah, with all the satellites that are doing, if they're microwave, UAV, UV, radar is usually radio, and how they work is the satellites are beaming, they're literally just beaming the Earth with those frequencies and then recording the reflection back to them.
Wow.
So when it's a radar-equipped satellite, they're beaming radio waves at the Earth and getting it back. They do it with the combination of all those different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, then they get a lot, and they can see things that you wouldn't really think they would be able to with satellites, like by analyzing plants, looking at them in specific wavelengths, they can tell how much photosynthesis they're doing, how much like carbon sequestration they're doing, all that sort of stuff. So
Wow.
they can really do quite a bit with these satellites and
Is
what
that
they're
like the
seeing. And they can-
photochemistry? Is that,
exactly.
I mean, would that be
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah, because it's based on what the plants are emitting, like whether they're emitting UV at a certain amount of electron emissions at different times, they can tell what's going on.
Wow.
Well, and Alison, I know like you've been looking into just the use of radium and isotopes and in terms of tracking, in terms of like actually like
Yeah, that's going to
monitoring.
come up in a
Exactly.
bit. Like
That's-
Leo did a
okay.
lot of work on radium, and then I've done like more about the tracking, the
Okay.
carbon. So I think.
And this was just I mentioned it earlier, but the Deloitte with that Avalanche blockchain and their partnership.
Well, the
with
ledgers,
the-
it's all these accounting firms. It's the big accounting firms, right? The Accentures, the Deloittes, the KPMGs. Like they're the embodiment of the Web3 contract layer. And I can't imagine like how many lawyers, like I don't feel like for the most part people who are doing contract law broadly understand the changes that are going to be coming. Like I mean, in these spaces, you hear all these people, the constitutionalists or whatever. And I'm like, you're not getting to your constitution. That smart contract layer is going to be between you and whatever idea of rights you think you have. Like if you constitutionalists need to get to work and figure out Web3 and whatever, I'm not totally confident in the Constitution, as it is. But if you think it is, then you need to fight for it, because you're going to be wrapped up in the cocoon of the sticky Web3 data layer. You're never getting through to that, any kind of justice. You're just going to be stuck in arbitration, in some automated law system.
And I looked it up real quick. Avalanche, they come out of Cornell. Just
oh, okay. After the stuff about Odom and studying the bird heartbeats, I think of Cornell really differently, because I used to only think about Cornell as the birds, they were known for birding.
Right.
That was the thing I knew them for, was oh, they're the people who like bird song. And I'm thinking now that I understand wave and frequency and stuff, and field theory, it feels a little creepier. I can totally imagine the ecosystem services of songbirds or something being factored in.
Well,
to your psychological well-being.
Create an NFT around on the blockchain. Okay.
Yeah, so this is a video. We probably should just play it. It was pretty crazy, if I remember correctly, about the Red Cross Catastrophe bond, the volcano bond that was securitized by Replexus. In the video, there's a whole community currency aspect that was a part of this deal that'll be talked about, and that was done through grassroots economics was a part of this. And at I have an article that goes into all the details more, but let's just play the video.
Okay, give me 1 second. I just have to add one thing.
Okay.
So I can get the audio. I didn't realize. I downloaded the other video, so it'll take me 2 seconds. 1 second. Audio input.
Oh, no worries. I'll talk about so the third-party verifier in this case is Mitiga Solutions, and they were a spin-off from the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, which is in this crazy cathedral, which we have in a couple slides.
Now I'm remembering.
Yeah, and they're a relatively new company, but they're basically all about weather modeling and artificial intelligence and all that sort of stuff. And they were in part incubated by Microsoft, and they're part of their planetary computer system. And they work also for they work for NATO, they work for other defense contractors. Indra is a big one in Spain, as well as Rolls-Royce and and other insurance companies too, like AXA and Howden Group, I believe. But there's a slide ahead that shows this.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it set up here.
Oh, cool.
Is there audio in this?
I thought there was, but maybe there's. I'm pretty sure there was audio.
Weird. What's going on? Can you guys hear the audio? I mean,
I can't.
Okay, 1 second. Let me try. I don't know why. I could just go to the. Boom.
Yeah, I opened it up on YouTube and there's audio.
Okay, 1 second. This is a little glitch here. Audio cable and.
It's interesting that it's Danish, Leo. The Danish folks were really central in refugee management. In the piece that I wrote, I was really shocked because they became really mean to immigrants. But they have the largest database of refugees and social service systems and stuff. They used to maybe be not so bad, and then they became horrible. But they were putting refugees on certain islands and stuff, and then sending them to labor camps and stuff.
1 second.
I
got a backup plan here. 1 second.
Okay.
Boom, 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 and.
Yeah, this was kind of all before I'd been looking into the Arise. Oh, there you go.
By a humanitarian emergency, like a natural disaster, quickly and at the right time is critical to enabling the best possible humanitarian response. To that end, Danish Red Cross is turning to insurance-linked securities, or ILS, to secure and disperse financing for humanitarian response in a more efficient manner. ILS are financial instruments which are sold to investors whose value is affected by an insured loss event. The most prevalent form of ILS traded on capital markets are catastrophe bonds, or cat bonds. A cat bond is a security that is used to transfer risk of financial loss arising from a catastrophic event from the sponsor to investors, in a similar way to how a person insures their property against loss or damage. In 2020, the Danish Red Cross is sponsoring not only the world's first humanitarian catastrophe bond, but also the industry's first pure volcano cat bond.
Wow.
Worldwide, 500 million people live near 1,500 active volcanoes. Individuals who may not be completely displaced from an eruption still suffer significant financial, livelihood, and human loss. For example, in 2010, one of Indonesia's most active volcanoes, Mount Merapi, caused economic losses of $750 million. This parametric cat bond is structured such that the principal is paid to Danish Red Cross if specified trigger conditions are met. Mitiga Solutions, an insure-tech company merging natural hazard expertise with supercomputing optimization, has developed the trigger methodology for this cat bond. The trigger is based on a hybrid approach. The first part of the payout is defined by the occurrence of a volcanic eruption, as measured by the column height of the ash plume. The second part is determined based on the wind direction, impacting the ash cloud's dispersion, and thus directly linked to the area most afflicted. To mitigate against concerns that if there is an eruption that doesn't trigger the bond, we have tiered the triggers across multiple predetermined ash plume heights. Replexus will set up the issuer for the cat bond, create, issue, and settle the notes digitally on a private permissioned blockchain system developed by Replexus. Once on the blockchain, investors can purchase the securities and trade them on a secondary market, using the blockchain with other ILS investors who also have access to the blockchain. Mitiga has developed the long-term probabilistic model to calculate expected financial loss to investors in the event of an eruption, as well as a short-term deterministic impact model, churning out post-eruption risk scenarios, thereby allowing the Danish Red Cross to deploy the funds it receives from the triggered bond to the greatest effect on the ground. The aim is to take advantage of capital markets and financial structural innovation combined with complex natural hazard modeling to deliver and deploy emergency funding exactly when most required and in a highly efficient manner.
Did I miss the community currency part?
They didn't talk about it there.
Okay.
So yeah, sorry
Do
about
not
the
buy solar
audio.
panels.
Hold on.
If you live in one of
Okay, sorry about the audio there. That was a little weird. I don't know why. Go ahead.
I just want to know what happens if there's not a lot of plume, but there's a lot of lava. To me, I'm like a little more worried about the lava. Oh.
Did you want to say some more about that?
Yeah, no, I was just quickly double checking something. But the part they didn't talk about is that in the areas that are affected by the volcano eruptions, that what Mitiga is doing, they're not just modeling the environmental dynamics and the financial dynamics of what happens when certain things are triggered. It's also the local communities, and also like their economics. And a part of the disaster relief scenarios, like that capital that the Danish Red Cross would deploy, or would actually be used as collateral for community currencies in those areas, facilitated by like grassroots economics. And in short, the whole community currency paradigm for development aid is basically having collateral based on with like fiat regular currency, and then using that to create these community currencies that they like geofence or can only be used in a certain area by that group and circulate in that way. And it's a way for them to create more money, essentially based on like a smaller pool of capital and collateral. And then it ties in with all the, connected, the surveillance and digital twinning and stuff of the local dynamics. But yeah, it's a part they didn't talk about.
Well, I threw this in because I think it just ties back into the LDS like connection and the coral bond and stuff. But not surprisingly, they're very connected to the Red Cross and disaster relief. And, that was something that came up in the article about Nigeria, is the way in which, religious communities sort of glom on to, disaster humanitarian things and use it to their, to advance other sorts of agendas. So this is from 2018, but they're the first leader of this, American Red Cross, like major givers fund. And so I can imagine that a lot of this outreach, maybe community currencies and things, might have involvement of faith-based communities in managing services or what have you, which would interface with the community currency, I think. And then they'll get the human capital piece of it, because I think Raul actually made an article about one of these volcano, one of the islands in the Caribbean that had a volcanic eruption, and then there were issues with people's health status of getting off island. But I can see that the displacement piece from the disasters will be a central part. Like, you'll manage the natural capital piece, the ecosystem services, like disaster piece, manage the human capital piece and the displacement on the other end. And I think many of the displaced people will end up, doing remote work that will uphold the digital panopticon program. So that's all I had to say.
Yeah, and
there.
be a part of like the building blocks program, where they have, their housing and education and all that stuff tied into one sort of
all integrated. Yeah. And this is just this was like microcredit, which to me, like the microcredit, micro insurance, it's the same sort of thing. So that the article talked about initially about the history with Grameen being the beginning. But, of course, a lot of this is, centers on entrepreneurship, right? Capabilities of low-income people and refugees. But they're definitely looking at like microtransactions in a aid space, a global aid space. And the church is very globally networked, right? Like if you were going to work at a global level, like if it wasn't the Catholic Church, it would probably be LDS, because they have such a robust mission program.
I need to actually move spots from where I am. I didn't reserve the seat for long enough.
Well, you know what, Leo, I'm not sure. Is there some more, like, did we get to Leo's stuff? Like,
we didn't really talk about Oak Ridge at all. But that was,
we have a lot more slides.
You had more slides there, but we could talk about that another time. I just need to move spots. Like, you can talk in this library. It's just you can like reserve a little room, and I only did it for 3 hours, which I knew would probably
thought we would get it done then.
Enough.
Do you want to duck out, or do you want to
I mean, I can just. I'm happy. It'll just take like a couple minutes to move.
Okay.
I'm happy to keep going. I just probably should.
All right.
I mean, I might be able to just stay, but
if nobody's jumping on your case, it's but it's up to you. Whatever works. Are they eyeballing you?
We have no. It's just like we have a fair amount. Like, I'm assuming this to get through all this stuff would probably be another like hour and a half at least.
We've got quite a few more slides.
I can go faster on some of it, but yeah.
Yeah, I actually have to go.
Yeah.
I'll be back in a minute.
Okay.
All right.
1 moment.
So you want to just
imagine that?
Yeah. Leo go, and then we can. I mean, I could probably keep talking about some stuff while he resettles if it's not his slides.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm not
sure.
Sure which piece.
I
think I slipped some stuff in.
Yeah. This was his next slide was this.
But, okay. Then I guess I should wait. Yeah.
I
think that's the Barcelona Supercomputer Center.
Yeah, let me look at our live stream and see if you guys are on the live stream.
Anybody have any questions?
Anybody have any questions while we're waiting for? Thanks for sticking with us, you guys. It's never
excitement of insurance, automated insurance. You're welcome to your automated luxury insurance prison. Can we help you today?
Well, I still haven't figured, you want to see the map of how this whole thing, how all this works out. And obviously the insurance is a huge, huge piece of it. But I still don't really understand how it all fits together, how all these different pieces actually fit together, because they do fit together. I'm sure of that.
Well, I mean, the reality is as far as I'm concerned, I think that the people at the top who are advancing these initiatives, like the goal of the machine learning, the emergent consciousness, I feel that if I'm not saying that they can necessarily fabricate things out of nothing, but I think that they can precipitate disasters like incipient does. I mean, we know that they can make economic disasters, right? We know that they can conduct war. We know that they can use like geopolitics to create the disaster, like capitalism that they want. They've admitted that the U.S. government and the Chinese government, I mean, it's pretty out in the open about weather engineering. I mean, there is some question about maybe the tectonics, right? Like if you can, like what might be available to them in terms of mobilizing like the plate network. So it feels like in a lot of respects, there are many disasters that can be made. Now, how closely can they dial it in? Like, I don't know that we're there, like that you could just like on demand turn up a thing that you want. But over time, if the goal is to displace people and to move them into these new spaces where they will be tokenized, put in temporary smart environments, be made to go through their paces, jump the hoops, all of that is going to be being fed into the simulation. And I think for me now, beyond the money and the control, that's the thing they most value, is like some sort of natural and social simulation data. And that's going to come through dispossession, which, I'm very familiar with what that dispossession looks like in a socioeconomic level. But now we're simply layering in like managing natural systems towards that effect. And, and some of the stuff doesn't even have to be a disaster. Like I can fully imagine that the corporate environmental agenda will start to displace people off of land, like even indigenous people from their own lands in the name of greening, right? In the name of decarbonization. And so like essentially we've written them a blank check under the climate carbon framing that they can just do whatever the hell they want. And then like, it's like being in a bad relationship where someone threatens to kill themselves if you don't do everything they want. Like that's sort of where we're at. The vast majority of the public has bought that if we don't do every last thing in the cybernetic control grid, we're all going to die and we're going to kill the planet. And I don't believe that, actually. I believe there's a lot of harm and I believe things need to be fixed, but I'm not buying the line that they're selling. So for me, that's why I'm sorry that it ended up getting sort of drawn out beyond insurance. But as the opportunity of the disaster capitalism being the shock to the system. And, I couldn't track down the source, so take it with a grain of salt. But I remember reading at one point, there was a lab, I believe it was at Harvard during World War II, where they were doing in the Air Force that they would develop models where you would create a shock to like an airplane wing and see how the reverberation happened and then readjust the design based on trying to tune it. Like you would tune in to what you wanted. And that they used that modeling scenario for economic modeling. But they could dial in an economic catastrophe. I mean, that's what the Chicago boys were so good at, right? You could dial in a price hike, a sign break, a war or something to create the frequency pattern and the after effect that you wanted. And so they've been doing that for, 80 years or so in the simulation. We've been living in the consequences of the simulation. But I think up to now, it's been mostly simulations around economies and geopolitics, but not so much about climate or human capital management.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does. And, it's so funny because you would think someone like Naomi Klein would know this. I mean, she wrote the shock doctrine for crying out loud.
Right? I know.
Yeah. Kind of incredible. And again, like life as simulation, like all the decision making, outsourcing it to data and simulations. Like we don't really understand like what the full implications of that are. like I said, I was at the smart cities thing and they were talking about the digital twinning and how you can model these things. And I'm like, well, yeah, what about people? And and it was just like, oh, we hadn't thought they knew though. Like, I mean, like privately, like they knew.
You're not supposed to talk about that yet. I mean,
not publicly.
That's not publicly. And, it is funny because yesterday I revisited one of my blog posts, like my first blog post is a little podcasty thing. And, I was commenting on it. And, I was reflecting on this social emotional learning, social impact bonds. And when I went down to DC and I was, I got a question and I was asking, like, how would you know if the offset for a middle school social emotional learning curriculum was going to be, addiction, incarceration, like how would you know to track? And like clearly it was going to be these soul-bound tokens, but it's different now. Like they weren't going to talk about it in 2017 or 2018, whatever then. Like they probably all knew about it. All the people in the room, Goldman Sachs would have known, but they weren't prepared to talk about it. So they just didn't answer my question, So we'll try not to get you a sunburn, Leo. Can you hear? Did I lose you?
Oh, I'm here.
I can.
Oh, okay.
Hey, you're completely outdoors, huh?
Darn it! I thought this would work.
Yeah, that signal's not very good there.
No, I'll try. I'll try somewhere else.
Just not the bathroom. You'll be like in the stall. Okay. Well, yeah. Just get back with us.
We can come back to it if you guys would rather just like do the other part some other time. I don't know. How are you feeling? I'm flexible.
Yeah, I mean, we could I mean, we probably have. We've gone 3 hours. We could probably go another 3 hours actually, because there's quite a few more slides. How many more slides do we have? What slide are we on? 37. There's a total of 69 slides, and we're at 37. So we're
Yeah.
a little over halfway.
Well, we could cut it. Leo has this slide and one more slide. I think that's the core of his stuff. So
Okay.
maybe if he gets persuaded, we could finish that part and take a break, and then we could, if he's open to coming back.
We can break it up into two. Maybe I'll feel a little bit better too. I'm just between my coughing and everything. It's just like I'm
3 hours is a long time. Is there anybody still left? Does anybody have thoughts? Or
the conversation kind of just stopped.
We bored everybody to death with insurance talk.
Like often, a lot of the conversation doesn't.
It's unrelated.
It kind of seems unrelated. The story of our live streams. But yeah, it says there's 43. YouTube is allowing 43 people to watch this right now.
To listen to our conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well let's wait for Leo to come back here, and yeah, I think maybe it's a good idea just to do a little bit more, and then I'll save everything and we'll just do those last slides on a second go around, because we did a pretty good number.
I mean, because essentially that's more oak isotope. So that's probably a logical place to stop. I think most of those are ones that I put in.
Okay. You like this shot of Leo here, though. He's
Windblown.
The windblown Leo.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is interesting to think, like, just the visuals of this image of the supercomputing center in this church, right? Because it feels like the church of science, right? The church of the computer, replacing, a natural creator, sacred, with this profane, cold system. Like it even has to be disconnected, in its own air-conditioned room. I mean, it's very significant. It feels very, again, I hate to keep going back to it, but it's like, what are we going to choose? Are we gonna fall in with the panic of that we have to comply, or it's a game over? Or are we going to figure that within the world, a dynamic natural world, which has, power and possibility beyond what we can imagine, that we could come up with some other options, right?
Yeah.
And
Someone said, "I don't feel like the conversation was totally unrelated." That's true. There is some of it that's related. I'm not saying none of it's related. I guess we're always just looking for like more like direct. It's
I'm
related,
just curious. Like, I mean, are other people, have anybody in there? Like, are there folks like talking about sort of the Web3 and
It's
like
well, a lot
AI
of the
and
conversation is more general, like more, kind of just more
Yeah.
general about the Great Reset and, like, but it's not getting into the specifics of what we're actually sharing here. So I guess that's what I was
Yeah.
talking about. But yeah, it's going to be difficult moving forward because, I think about that, like I really I don't want to participate in this thing. I don't want to have a smartphone and don't want to, move. I'm starting to learn Linux again. I'm trying to figure out ways where I can, function in this world without being a part of that. But it seems like it's going to be increasingly difficult just for even basic necessities, or, we're going to have to figure out ways that we can operate and we can I don't know.
Yeah.
It's going to be a tough
Hello?
tough one. Hey,
So Leo, we were thinking that I think we have this slide and the next one is yours with the names, and then we can maybe take a break and like come back to it later. And if you don't feel up for it, like later, I think most of the back end stuff is mine too. So we'd love to have you, but if you have other obligations at some point, like I could carry that back end.
Wait, do you mean like
Like on a different day.
Oh, yeah. No, I can do it.
could break this up and like maybe you could schedule the room again another day, and we could just because there's quite a few more. I mean, we probably have at least, I'd say to do this right, there's probably at least an hour more of content.
Yeah, the whole Oak Ridge, all that ecological stuff.
Yeah. So how are you feeling? Do you want to? I mean, like maybe in a week or something, we could come back, and but let's we could finish. Have you do these last two slides.
I think it's this one, and then the next one is the names, like the black, as I remember. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't really have so much to add. It's like the image kind of says it all. I'm not sure exactly. Like, I need to look more into the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, but it was one of the largest in Europe. It's not like as cutting edge anymore. But it's like built. It's in this cathedral. Like that's what it looks like in Barcelona.
Well,
it's pretty intense.
And I just want to say, like, my long piece, kind of like whatever, like about the refugees, about Barcelona, about like it was really centered. Like a lot of that, like the Mondragon cooperative. And the role of the Vatican in that, like that was in, like, it wasn't exactly Barcelona, but it was nearby, like in that part of Spain. And so I feel like, I don't know. I mean, we were listening to like Spain around the graphite stuff, but I don't know that like people have a lot of attention on the role of Spain in this, but I think it is significant. And I think a lot, especially some of like the more socialist leaning cooperative kind of, elements that blockchain is going to go after. The left is like a decentralized, horizontal, like autonomous, great options for, non-hierarchical. And this is part of like one of the things I was talking about, like with the refugees. And I don't know, Jason, if you can see down to the slide deck, there's one that actually is about refugees how far down? It's like a woman, it says holacracy, something like that, like refugees. I don't know how far down it is in the slide deck, but oh, it's pretty far down. Never mind. Okay, it's that one. We'll wait till next time. Maybe I'll just say like, so like in the refugees, like, cause like, I think it does build. So can we just skip to her? Like the idea of this edge, like, I feel like, so it's like Steffers is teaching me more about like the encoding, right? The imprinting of language and images on this. So this organization is called the Enlivening Edge, right? So we've already established that the cyberneticists are imagining that there's order from chaos on the edge. And it's talking about a refugee in self-organization, right? So that is totally like a decentralized network blockchain system, like within a refugee encampment. You've got the community conversations with just all of the circles. Like you talk about edges, like just look at that on the right with all of the edges. And they're actually developing something called holacracy, which is a trademark. It's like a management theory of horizontal organization, like flexible, autonomous. And I believe what's happening is that they will create, in partnership with humanitarian aid and faith-based communities, like through disaster capitalism, whether natural or economic or war, decentralized pop-up communities with a certain level of smart infrastructure that are going to be framed with all of these services that are going to essentially have people perform agency, right? Like perform interactions, use these community currencies. Leo, you've talked about that before with Cello, and then make them visible to the machine. So somehow I feel like they imagine that if they get enough of these data sets that they can start to like bubble up this emergence of what they think they want from, like, it's like a mirrored humanity, like some sort of, I don't know exactly what it looks like. That doesn't feel like biogeochemical, but there's some sort of energetic that they're seeking in these circles, and that the holacracy, the holon, is central to that. And that science says, like, social innovation academy, they're developing these refugees as social entrepreneurs. So there's a disconnect from your original place into a place you have no connection to, you have no energetic connection to, you have no like limited social connections. That's erased, and you're put in a whole new place as an agent in an agent modeling simulation. And so anyway, that's one of the things I wanted just to piggyback on with the community currencies, is it is that dislocation and then the restart of like, okay, so let's create a new interactive system and model it, right? And use it but on the cheap, right? Like the guy who was at the MTA, Vinay Gupta, like the refugee guy, the Hexayurt guy, they're going to come up with these pop-up, green, solar, whatever, like with some sort of minimal, and they may not have high-tech telecom, but that's what's coming, is these new next-gen nuclear modular systems. And they've literally said, like, this is great for disasters and humanitarian aid. Like they've said, like, that's part of their marketing for nucleation capital. It's like they're intending that that's what that's going to be for. So they're just, it's, we've been conditioned, like even in Philadelphia, with pop-up beer gardens, pop-up, like, using these cargo containers to create like sort of, shabby chic, hipster spaces. But the whole pop-up, like stripped down ethos, I think it's just going to pervade all of it. And I think that the natural disasters are going to be a big part of it. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we link that onto your community currency conversation.
Definitely. And like a part of a lot of the community currency and like blockchain based UBI projects are like health surveys and all these sorts of, they gather data not just from like the transactions and that sort of thing, but often like kind of give them or force them to take out these surveys about like their health stuff. And Mitiga was involved in the grassroots economics, Red Cross, community currency projects, and a part of the like mining that data and using the health survey data from the community currency pilots.
Well, it's interesting that Mitiga, they called it community inclusion currency.
Yeah.
And so like, if you don't have it, you have community exclusion, like, I mean, it implies that, without this thing, you're not included unless you have this currency.
Yeah. And they're starting to experiment too with like geo-based community currency. So like on the smart contract level, you could only trade the currency if you're within like a predefined geographical range. And that's the Astral protocol. They're working with Cello and all of the others. But yeah, wow. there's a lot of that. And they're creating the whole, just any sort of, for geographical data tied into smart contracts. They're building all of that.
Did you want to say something about this one?
Back up to yeah. Is there anything on that? Yeah, I think you talked about
honestly,
them.
I wish I had more. There's definitely a lot more research to do, but just these were on their website, the list of organizations that they're working with, and there's a lot of aerospace here. They do a lot with the Eurocontrol, is the like air traffic controller for the European Union, so they're working with them. NATO, just straight up. Indra is a big one in Spain, with like aerospace.
Is Indra
and
energy
defense
or is it just
contracting.
blockchain? Is it
Indra? No, they're like I think they're like aerospace.
Oh.
okay?
Like just a
Yeah,
big
they're going to
defense
rule us from
contractor.
there. I mean, that's the thing. Like it's
Yeah, exactly. And the satellites and all that, because that's what Matiga is all about, is the modeling from the satellite data.
how long will it take them to all fall
ties in.
down if we stop maintaining them?
I know.
Did you guys see the
I don't know
announcement?
what the
SpaceX and or T-Mobile and SpaceX just made an announcement about a partnership like 2 days ago. Elon Musk, came out whatever with, but yeah, they're starting next year. They're going to allow satellite on your phone with T-Mobile and SpaceX. SpaceX is launching a satellite specifically for cellular service. So it's like the idea that, you'll even out in the middle of the desert, you'll be able to get. But they say it's like next year it'll be beta or whatever. But they just made a big announcement. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah. and
Somebody
for
told me that he
people
was
don't know,
backing the nuclear stuff.
Yeah. T-Mobile is quite involved in Web3 and digital identity, and Cello specifically, they're invested in our, like one of Cello's big things is being able to tie your phone number to your crypto address like automatically, so you can just send crypto to a phone number, and T-Mobile is helping with that infrastructure.
Well, the other day I was like, this, you have your SIM card, and I was like, wait a minute, what's the SIM? Is SIM, because you have the SIMs, simulation and whatever. So I looked up like what does SIM stand for? It's Subscriber Identity Module. Did you guys know that? That's I didn't know that, but anyway.
Yeah, it is.
So it's like in a way we like our SIM cards are kind of our, we already have kind of a digital ID in a sense.
Totally.
Well, I was trying to set up my little podcasty thing, or put them on places, but you had to always attach it to your email or your phone number or something. So when you overstep, they can just go and pull it all up at once. It's a little creepy feeling. I mean, not that I'm, whatever, just in general. No.
Yeah.
I was wondering, are there
All right.
were there questions?
Oh, yeah.
I have not seen any questions. Yeah.
I think this material is kind of new. It's hard for people
yeah.
to figure out.
There's a lot.
Them to death.
Yeah, I've been myself catching up on all this stuff, so it's a lot of this is new to me as well. So I'm with you guys.
I'm definitely still learning how to talk about it and stuff. It's hard.
Yeah, it's almost unimaginable having to talk about it. That's the thing. And yet we have to do it. So, well, thank you, Leo.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting, Jason. We'll come do the second half.
Yeah, we'll schedule another. I don't know why it does that. We'll
I
schedule.
think it's the Oak Ridge stuff it's a little easier. I feel like to digest.
Yeah, we'll within the next week or so we'll have another one of these.
Cool.
Oh, Chris, someone said Christine asked a question, sort of. I don't think I'm going to be able to. I don't think I'm going to be able to find that. So, Christine, if you want to throw it back up there again, I'll find it. But I've been trying to follow the chat, but I didn't see a question.
Anything?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I feel like we keep wandering further and further. It's not actually we're aimless. It's not that we're not going towards a destination. This is the destination is radio eugenics hive mind consciousness. That is the destination.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Most people just don't have the capacity to hold it, right? They've kind of carved out the things that they're interested in, and then they just follow that, whatever the updates are on whatever subset. And it takes a certain level of commitment to sort of try to figure this out, because it's not obvious. And you have to be willing to feel pretty uncomfortable about it, because once you realize like, hey, yeah, they can control, like they can mess with the weather, they can like bet on like demolishing whole towns, and they don't mind it, and as soon it's going to be automated, and by the way, we're going to like coat the world in smart dust. It's a lot, but I don't know until we can figure out a way to articulate it clearly that we're going to be able to redirect, other than just put our intention out there to try to hold space for some other option.
Yeah, and having the story straight, I think, is really important. Christine, the question was, I haven't heard Alison speak to sex tech. Actually, you have, Alison. There's like, I think there's like 800 and 900 videos on your channel, so get watching. No.
Yeah. Well, mostly, I mean,
sex tech and the pornography, and to see how the energy harvesting could fit in with sex tech. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I feel like the
Well,
What's Left podcast, they had a really interesting little discussion about the sex tech stuff, that and to kind of talk about that, the energy harvesting, whatnot.
Yeah. Well, I think it was last year, when all the graphene stuff was really coming out, like there's a lot of graphene in like scuba suits and haptic suits. And, to me, the wearables, the idea of like camming, right, and teledildonics and the stuff that you can, like, as much as, there might be some people out there, who like listening about parametric insurance. Like there's probably more people out there who are interested in like other entertainment options, right? But like with these haptics, like you could literally have one person like, digitally involved with dozens or if not hundreds of people. Like that's the thing. And what I keep saying, like through a haptic suit, right? Like you put on your haptic suit, I put on my haptic suit. Like these are like the worlds that are being built. And this is like, that was one of my real reasons I had such a hard stop with Derek Bros about the digital child labor, because I'm like, yeah, like, so today it's playing a card game. Like tomorrow it's what, like kiddie sex porn? Like you have to go there, because clearly the people who are running these systems, like that's where their mind is going to go. Like, what are the protections, right? Like, oh, you can do, like kids should be able to do any kind of work. Well, maybe not, right? And so, and we went to Rockfin, and that was, again, this is not in any way about them specifically, but when we said like, sure, there's some people who like an intellectual podcast. There's some people who like, titillating content. The AI wants to know all the stuff. Like it wants to know like how to be like, brainy, it wants to know how to be sexy. Like it wants to sit on your shoulder, tap, 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 and go, how do you do that? Like, what does it feel like? What are you thinking? Like, that's the mirror. And so every bit of life, I feel like they're trying to provoke it. Like, whether it's like the happiest parts, the most tragic parts, like it leads towards extremity. I feel like right now, like it's got a lot of the basics, now it's really triggering for more extreme content. And I feel like beyond the predatory nature of it or the finance nature of it, that it's the consciousness, right? Like, where is your consciousness in that space? And, I wrote about it's not exactly the same, but that they were looking at, those stable coins, right? Like Leo, like energetic linked energy-backed stable coin stuff for erasing the quantum thermodynamic, pushing the demon box or whatever, the Maxwell's demon. And that like theoretically your piezoelectric body, like your heartbeat could power that. Now they might say, oh, well, you have some sort of, induced injury and now you need a heart monitor. And so that's how they get it implanted. But then ultimately that heart monitor maybe end up being your wearable and your interface with Web3, and like whatever extra power you have is erasing data for this quantum thermodynamic, like free energy wheel. So there's the, digital sex tech. And then there's also like the heart space. Like there's the physical part, but then there's also like the spiritual and sacred part too, like all parts of love and experience and minds and bodies. It wants possession of that. It wants to possess it. But it can only possess it in ones and zeros. And that's not, that's only a small, like that's only an echo, the faintest echo of what it actually is. So
Totally.
Great. Well, we'll schedule another one of these here coming up. Thank you, Leo and Allison, and everyone that's been sticking with us here.
all right.
Until next time.
Thank you, folks. Yeah, have fun.
All right.
That was
Bye, Leo.
hopefully,
Bye, Jason.
give
This
us
is
some
a
feedback
crazy
on that.
image. Like this is like,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
did see ILS on that video, that Red Cross video. It did say ILS.
Yeah,
The
it's
Danish
insurance
Red
linked
Cross, it did say
securities.
ILS.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's their thing.